as people I keep on adding people as we go. But in the next minute, I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. I'll give people who just were admitted just the latest update that our president wound up having an injury this morning, and he is being sutured. And so I'm going to let Jessilyn, our vice president, speak first before Andrew. But he plans to be here. It's just a matter he needs to finish getting his suturing done. So he will be here. He is dedicated. But I will go ahead and get ready to get started. I think it's about time. So our first speaker, instead of President Andrew, is going to be our Vice President, Jessilyn Dolan, who I wasn't originally going to introduce. It was going to be Andrew, but I will tell you that she's got many talents. She's a doula. She's got expertise in childbirth, postpartum. She's a sexual abuse nurse examiner. She's on the cannabis committee. She is a lactation consultant, and has many other talents as well. And she's a very educated in the cannabis area, because she is a committee member. And I will go ahead and turn this over to her. Do you need to share any documents? Do I need to?
No, I don't.
I'm putting you as a co-host just so that you can.
Yeah, I didn't make a PowerPoint or presentation, just some words and thoughts to share with you guys. So.
Okay.
There. All right. Well, thank you guys for your time today and being here to help us represent and advocate for Vermont nurses and, as always, our patients, right? For the past year or so, I've been proudly serving ANA-Vermont as their vice president, and I chair the Government Affairs Committee during this 2021 legislative session right now. Joining ANA gifted me teamwork and support and gave me a much better understanding of the legislative process. So there's more benefits than I can possibly describe in a few minutes here today, but I do want to thank you, Meredith, Executive Director, and our President, Andrew, for their passion, their relentless availability, and their encouragement. I want to start by acknowledging that we're living in a new world, a world based in short term on getting through and recovering from a pandemic, as well as in the big picture, creating a more just, equitable, and healthy society. Hard and intense as it's been, there's so much that we've learned from all these experiences over the last year. We know that in this world, nursing and healthcare in general has taken a whole new meaning for both professionals and patients alike. We also know that for 19 years running, nurses have been and still are the most trusted profession according to the Gallup polls. We know that as population ages, there's concern about having enough nursing workforce to care for our elderly. But do any of us really know how crucial it is to have nurses as an integral part of not only the healthcare system, but political and legislative decision-making process as well? Does anyone know just how much nurses can help shape that needed change as we forge ahead into this justice-leaning post-pandemic world? I do. I'm convinced of it now. One of the things I've learned throughout the pandemic is really how important it is for nurses to be part of the conversation. I've learned we need to speak up and advocate loudly for both our patients and our own colleagues and workforce. I've also learned that in Vermont, average citizens have the unique ability, compared with a lot of other states, to reach out and make real and valuable connections with our elected officials. I know now that if we speak up, if we make noise, we will be heard. So we need nurses with their extreme bravery, vast experience, and deep credibility to show up and speak up and do it again and again. So thank you for being here today. In fact, today is just a small example of the many ways that nurses can and must advocate for and represent themselves and our patients. Today is a day to connect with one another as a community of nurses and with our leaders as valued professionals. But it's not the only day. We need to do it every day, together as a team of nurses, from the hospital per diem float to the long-term and home health nurses, to nurse educators and practitioners, to associations like this. We're stronger and our voices are louder together. Together we can lead Vermont to profound and needed change. So my primary goal for ANA-Vermont Government Affairs Committee is to create and find simple, quick, but consistent ways nurses can help in our advocacy efforts. By expanding our contacts and our collaborations, we hope to have even more strength in numbers, and when we speak up, make even more of an impact. Now, I know a lot of people are intimidated by the idea, but speaking up is as easy as filling out an online survey, sending an email or a letter in support of a bill that we stand behind, maybe making a phone call to your representative, or even testifying in front of a committee. In a small state like this, sometimes it only takes a few people reaching out to their legislators to get major changes made. Think about it. If just 10% of nurses from each hospital floor, each agency, and each practice made that email or phone call, the impact would be almost unimaginable. Honestly, I love learning more how to make change, but I've also learned something even more important, I think. Our leaders don't just need to hear from nurses as they're commenting on policies which are being created. Our leaders need to include nurses in the creation of these policies. So I promise to encourage and help more nurses to get active and involved in the legislative process. After all, I'm a prime example of someone who used to just leave it up to somebody else and not use my voice for that larger change. Along with my promise to the nurse community, I also have a request for our lawmakers. I ask that they include nurses in their work. Include nurses on advisory boards, include nurses on committees, include nurses when you're seeking testimony. I'm asking hardworking public servants to go shoulder to shoulder with nurses every day. Include us and allow us to fight like the heroes that we are. So let's get specific. Let me tell you what I've seen this year. So many proposed bills and amendments that should have, but don't necessarily include nurses. So some examples, S42 is an act relating to establishing an emergency service provider wellness commission. This is a proposed 23-person board dealing with emergency service provider wellness, which doesn't include a nurse. An emergency services, emergency room, or sexual assault nurse examiner, SANE nurse, is necessary for both patient and nurse advocacy. Not to mention the fact that nurses are emergency service providers and need representation on any board related to healthcare, whether directed at the public or at the workforce. Then there's Bill S-120, which would create a joint legislative healthcare affordability study committee to explore opportunities to make healthcare more affordable for our Vermont residents and employers. It's a 6-member board that will include 3 people from the House, 3 people from the Senate. So we need to ask legislators to include a nurse. Mari Cordes would be great because we know nurses have hands-on experience with these issues. Bill H-210 would create a 27-person board tasked with addressing disparities and promoting equity in healthcare. 27 people, 27. And again, what don't they have on the board? A nurse. Equity is a central pillar of nursing practice, and we are the ones who engage most with health equity and health disparities on the patient care level. We do the work at the bedside, in the clinic, through the health departments, home visits. You know this. We know it in our bones, what's actually not theoretically needed. Bill H-410 would create Artificial Intelligence Commission to support the ethical use and development of. The 16-member commission includes 1 member from the Vermont Medical Society, which is fantastic, but they would benefit enormously from the unique but gravely important perspective of who else than a nurse. So now, while you might not think artificial intelligence is within a nurse's wheelhouse, remember that we are the most trusted profession. AI is a complex and potentially scary issue, which will impact every aspect of our society. Our ethics and vision can advocate for wellness, equity, and justice in a way not many other professions really can. Bill H-243 proposes establish working group on services for adults with autism. This 19-member committee, again, doesn't include a nurse. Then there's not 1, but 2 bills, H-22 and S-23. Neither one had any action this session, which would require at least 1 member of the Green Mountain Care Board be a licensed physician, PA, naturopath, or nurse. ANA-Vermont strongly supported this both last year and this year, and we continue the fight for nurses to be included. But that's not all. There's another committee about to be formed without including a nurse, unfortunately, or any medical professionals. As Vermont does cross over to an adult use cannabis market, the Cannabis Control Board will have a 12-person advisory board. The key piece here is that the medical cannabis program will now fall under the jurisdiction of that board and its advisory committee. But the proposed makeup of the board has no patient voices, no medical representation, and therefore no understanding of patient needs. It's imperative we have medical patients and medical professionals and nurses involved in overseeing a medical cannabis program. But wait, there's a bit more. Bill S-25 relates to miscellaneous cannabis regulation. It passed the Senate and crossed over to the House. If it passes, it'll add a 13th seat to that 12-seat advisory board. But we need that seat to be allocated for a medical professional. So why not a nurse? This bill would also transfer all the medical program's current finances to the adult use program, almost a year before anticipated. That loss of revenues will be a loss for patients. This money could easily be used in a more direct way to support and impact the patients themselves. That's what we're about. Our patients deserve that. Whether they get lower program fees, more available educated medical professionals for support, or by opening up more access to rural patients with free delivery. Patients can use funds for much needed and better support. Patients deserve the best, we know that, but to get better, to give patients the best we can offer, patients and nurses need to have both the education needed and, most importantly, representation. And that's by giving nurses a seat at the table. I know that's all pretty intense, lots of information, lots of bills, right? But unfortunately, we've also got some good news in education starting too. I'm excited to quickly announce ANA-Vermont and Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association are offering a virtual cannabis education course for nurses and medical providers, as well as a couple of live interactive panels in May with patients, caregivers, and cannabis medical and legal professionals as well. So all these bills I mentioned and the examples I just used, they're all just a few examples of how nurses need to be included. As Government Affairs Committee Chair for you guys, I plan to reach out to every nursing student, every nurse union and their rep, every hospital and agency in the next year, and strive to get more nurses politically active and have their voices be a bigger part of the legislative process. At the same time, I'll be asking our legislators to include nurses in decision-making regarding the delivery of healthcare in the state of Vermont. We are the backbone of the healthcare system, the literal feet on the ground of this Green Mountain state. I wonder, how many nurses does it take? How many constituents are needed to make enough noise to allow nurses to help, to allow us to make the needed change? I think we should work to find out together, don't you? Because you know, and I know, that if nurses can save lives, if we can comfort and console and medicate and heal, if we can be present from birth to death and all the hard, charismatic, complicated, vulnerable moments in between, then we can and will move mountains together. So thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing to do this work with us. So thank you guys for listening, and I am excited to move forward in the next year with some new vigor and get some more nurses involved and really raise our voices. So thank you again.
Suddenly realized I was thanking you and I was muted. So, thank you, Jessilyn, for speaking.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Our next speaker is Juliette Carr. Juliette has many skills. She's actually in school now. She can tell you many stories, and she is one of the most, I just find her wonderful to listen to. I think she's one of our new stars that's going to be a leader that's coming up that we need to keep an eye on. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say today, but she is in school, she's advocating, and without further ado, let me introduce Juliette Carr.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for that no pressure introduction. Um, and thank you, Jessilyn, for that really motivating first talk. I'm very jazzed up now to see some nurses get active and talk to their legislators. So I'm an RN in Windham County down in Southern Vermont. And I'm graduating this summer from nurse practitioner school. So soon I'll be an advanced practice nurse in primary care. And I got into nursing because I needed a job that would let me stay in rural Vermont to raise my family, which is really not that easy, as I'm sure a lot of us know, right? So I started as an LNA doing rural home care, and then I took associate's prereqs and ended up transferring into a BSN. And then I worked as a floor nurse for about eight years in L&D, newborn nursery, did some maternal child public health in small rural hospitals, got my RNC, and taught clinical for bachelor's students before going back for my master's. So I've kind of done the whole gamut of like nursing roles. And now I'm about to graduate from Georgetown's online nurse practitioner program. And I'm really looking forward to serving Vermont as a primary care provider. And one thing that's really cool, I think, about the FMP role is that I'm still a nurse. I've got that holistic biopsychosocial understanding of health and wellness and a deep understanding of the public health and population health needs of our community. And that's one thing that I personally really love about nursing is that you can go from a certificate course at community college as an LNA all the way up through your doctorate as a nurse. You know, without a big career change, you can just add to the role and build and build and build without giving up anything that you've done before, which I find to be personally really empowering. And nurses are trained to advocate for our patients, right? That's a critical aspect of our role, from LNAs all the way up to DNPs, but we don't necessarily think about advocating for our communities as a whole on a population level, or even for ourselves as professionals. I didn't think I really had anything to offer at a policy level, or even that my ideas were anything that politicians would be interested in. I even had a policy class in my bachelor's program, but it seemed like so much extra work, especially once I was working those 12-hour night shifts. It just didn't seem relevant to my day-to-day life, right? And it honestly seemed over my head, like this is not something I'm qualified for. And that turned out to be wrong. One thing that's happened in grad school is that they really drive home that nurses are leaders in our community. People respect us, they trust us, they tell us their most personal problems and fears. They believe us when we speak. They ask us to stand between them and death, and we do that gladly, right? We have an obligation as nurses to rise to the honor of that trust. And I think that that's like it's a blessing and a curse at both times, right? Like on the one hand, we can really rise to that challenge. On the other hand, that's a lot of expectation for us. I had a class on health policy last summer that really encouraged us to think of ourselves as experts in healthcare issues, because we are, right? Who knows about multifactorial health influences, health access, social determinants of health better than the nurses serving these communities? Who understands which patients can get post-discharge home visits, or who to contact to get a free car seat, or how a broken down car and no childcare affects whether or not someone can get their asthma medication, or how a Meals on Wheels dependent person may struggle with the dietary requirements of kidney disease, right? That's us, that's nursing. We are experts on this. And my final project for that policy class was to write a policy proposal. So I wrote a proposal to make WIC benefits redeemable at farmers markets, to promote equity, address health disparities in rural food deserts, and to serve as an economic stimulus directing federal funds to small family farms, right? Health promotion. On a whim, I emailed it to Representative Cordes, since she's a nurse, and I was hoping that maybe she'd give me some feedback, or she'd be interested in the idea of access to farm fresh food as a healthcare issue. It was really just kind of like an impulse. I didn't have an expectation of an outcome, and she really surprised me by writing back that she loved it. She would explore turning it into a bill. And it ended up being a bill to study the technology needed to enact the policy, which will hopefully be adopted in 2022. We'll see. But that was crazy for me to have my little idea taken so seriously and with such an immediate response. So I guess I kind of got bit by the bug, and I started watching the bills the legislature is considering and writing emails to representatives when the bills affect health and healthcare. Because really, they aren't nurses. They don't talk to a lot of nurses. And it turns out that when nurses speak, legislators listen just like everybody else, right? So I get great, thoughtful responses. I think it comes back to the fact that I always start out by telling them that I'm an RN in Vermont, and that comes with a lot of credibility. It's seriously so easy. You fire off like 3 to 5 sentences about why public transportation is a healthcare issue, or why loan repayment keeps young people in Vermont, or whatever, and it affects their thinking. This is a really small state, and they don't hear from that many constituents about any one issue. So you can make a really big difference by contacting our reps. If they get 6 phone calls on a bill, that's noticeable. If 12 is a flood. If half the nurses on your unit sent off an email over lunch break, you might actually get what you asked for. You want your loans paid back, or tax incentives to help you afford to stay in Vermont, or maybe funding for nurse-led public health initiatives so you can do postpartum visits, or in-home diabetic teaching, or get a ramp built at home for a chair-bound patient. What matters to you? Part of their job is literally to listen to us, but they can't do that if we don't speak up. Who knows what our patients and communities need like we do? We are working experts on rural public health, health equity, the needs of aging Vermonters, the opioid crisis, the health impacts of climate change, just to name a few big issues right now in Vermont. Nursing is in all of those. Our voices belong in the rooms where decisions are made. We have expertise to share. One example of this is a House bill for loan repayment, H332, that specifically says it should go to physician's assistants over nurse practitioners on the rationale that it will force RNs to stay at the bedside instead of becoming advanced practice nurses, APNs. Think about that again. So no loan repayment for nurses, specifically to prevent nurses from expanding our scope. This is despite the fact that APNs in Vermont have a broader scope of practice than PAs. We have a holistic understanding of health since we're nurses, right? We get great patient outcomes and satisfaction ratings. We're extremely affordable, and we're already the backbone of healthcare in rural Vermont. This is already in place here. That's an anti-nurse bill that reinforces the myth that we're just nurses and that we need to stay in our place. There's not a lot of PAs in Vermont since there's no PA school here. It was seriously probably like 1 PA who called their rep about privileging them for loan repayment over nurses. Imagine what nurses could get if one nurse from each shift made a phone call. Just imagine that for a second. There's a lot of us. What do we want? So the end of the story is that now I've joined the legislative committee for Vermont ANA because I finally found my voice as a nurse, and I realized how much power there is in that. This feels like my nursing union on a prednisone burst, right? It's not just advocating for my unit to get those half-hour lunch breaks that they don't pay us for. It's advocating for my whole profession to get and stay middle class here, to have a meaningful career here, a comfortable life here, and a future with our families here in Vermont, in exchange for the nights and the weekends and the holidays that we give up to care for Vermonters. And it's also about advocating for my neighbors to have access to the high quality healthcare they deserve as they age and as the climate warms, and addressing some of the stark equity and access issues that we see in rural and BIPOC communities, including our population problems related to attracting and retaining young families. All of that is nursing. So I'm working on modernizing our outreach to make it easy for nurses to engage. So you'll be able to quickly contact your legislators on issues that matter to you while you wait for your patient to come back up from the OR or over a cup of coffee in the break room. Whenever it's convenient, you can get involved. So when you see that roll out, please participate and share it on social media and with your colleagues. And if you have issues that you care about, please reach out to us on the legislative committee so we can help advocate for it. Your voice has power in Vermont, and all you need to do is speak up.
Great job, Juliette. So I think that you underestimate, just what an impact you can have still, because there's so much that, as you said, nurses don't realize how much of an impact that they have. And it doesn't take but a handful of nurses to make a huge impact on what happens, whether a bill moves forward if they wind up advocating. And unfortunately, right now, it seems like nurses are so tired and exhausted and overwhelmed with what they're dealing with that they forget about others may be directing the course of what affects their practice, the scope of their practice, and how their patients may be affected by that. I'm going to go ahead and start my talk. and go into that. And I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to ask Jessilyn, could you keep an eye out for Andrew? Because, you know, when he comes in, I'll go ahead and let him in, but I won't be able to, when I'm sharing my PowerPoint, to be able to see if he's in the waiting room, to be able to admit him. So
Did you make me co-host, Meredith? If you make me co-host, then I can see.
I can, right now it's letting me just have one host, but I was hoping I could make it a co-host. I think I might need to do that in a different way. But let me go ahead. I'm going to start to share this so that you can see this, and I will start this. There, now it's starting to do that, and I will do the start my slideshow so that you can see some of these pictures as we go through. And so I'm talking, you know, mainly about advocacy and just helping people know the process of how a bill becomes a law. These are just some basic learning outcomes that we're going to wind up covering. And a lot of people don't realize that they're already involved with health policy, because all health policy is a plan by organizations to obtain an outcome. So if you're on your PTA committee, you know, develop, you know, no smoking rules for your school, you're already involved with local policy. So it's not as scary as people think. We're talking mainly about today at the state level. And in our state level, you know, there are about 1,000 bills that are introduced. At the national level, federal level, about 5,000 bills are introduced. So at the state level, about a third of these pass and are signed into law, while it's about 1 in 4 at most at the national level. And the biggest one that we're impacted by, of course, is our State Practice Act. And a lot of people think that because it's a law, that it's stagnant and it doesn't change. But what people need to understand is that there are aspects of the law that are changed almost annually. That's our state, what affects our scope of practice. And some of the things are just basic things like how much we pay for our licensure, you know, our fees. So to go forward and to tell your story, you don't need anything other than the ability to tell your story, to have a story and information they haven't heard before. And they're very unlikely to have heard their story. And as was said prior, people are really interested in what nurses have to say. They're very open to hearing from us. We're usually welcomed into the legislative arena. And they love if we have a little data to share, but it's not a have to, but it's wonderful when we do. They like that. There is you can go to the website at the General Assembly, and you can actually click on this and get this how a bill becomes a law spiel. So I just wanted to let people know that if you click on this, you can actually go there yourself. But it basically talks about how when a bill is first introduced, it's assigned a number and it's a committee. That's your first reading. So it basically just gets assigned and it goes to that committee. Then it has to be considered by the committee. So after it's considered by the committee, they will they act on it? Will they not work on it? Will they, what are they going to do with this? So at this point, it's still in the committee. They're looking at it, they discuss it, maybe they take some testimony on it, and then it goes on. And if they take a bunch of testimony and then they vote on it, it can be basically come out of the committee, but it's not going to wind up coming out of or going to the floor unless it comes out of the committee. Once it does get voted positively out of the committee, then it'll wind up going to the floor where it goes to the second reading. At that point, it's usually a member of the committee that winds up introducing it to the floor, telling a brief what it's about. And then it can be amended by the floor, suggestions made, debated, and then after it, that process goes through, it winds up going the following day to a third reading where there can be more debate and it can be voted on. I'm going to go to the next page since some people find it easier to look at it verbally. So basically, it starts out and it can be on either side, House or Senate side, that it begins. And as we learned from Juliette, you can wind up being a citizen, talking to your legislator and help to draft the law yourself, with a legislator. Then it goes assigned to the committee. If it was a House representative, then it goes to the House side. If it was a senator you were talking with, it goes to the Senate side. Then it winds up, so going to that committee on the House or Senate side, it considers it, takes testimony, gets either favorably approved, or it may just sit there and not ever get acted on, tabled, which kills it. But if it does get testimony and voted approved, it gets out of the committee and goes to the floor for that second reading. So then after the second reading, the questions are asked, the amendments, it goes to the floor for the third reading the following day, where more debate occurs. And then further on, once it's the third reading, it gets voted on. So if it's in the House side that it started and it goes through this process, it gets voted on the House side. Once it's approved on the House side, then it goes to the opposite side. So if it starts on the House side, it then goes to the Senate side. If it starts on the Senate side, it goes to the House side. Has to go through the same process, get approved, gets into a committee, assigned to a committee, gets approved, hopefully by that committee. Once it gets out of committee, it goes to the floor, is introduced by a committee member to the floor, the opposite side where it started, is voted on after it's debated on for, the second reading. Then after the third reading, it can, is when the vote actually happens. So once it passes both those sides, then it winds up going to the governor. Now, once it goes to the governor can sign the bill, or he can veto it. If he just lets it sit there for 5 days and does nothing, and it's, say Monday and that happens, it actually becomes a bill if he does nothing, unless it's like a holiday or a Sunday, as I have like in the bottom here. If he doesn't, if the General Assembly adjourns within 3 days of the bill, then it doesn't become a law. But otherwise, if he just ignores it for long enough, it can also become a law. But if he vetoes it, it takes a 2/3 majority in both houses to override the veto, which does happen. One of the most recent examples that I can think of was last year. At the end of the year, we had the Global Solutions Act, and that was a very popular bill, and a lot of discussion happened. And after it wound up, people talked about it for quite a while, and got passed by both it started on the House side, went to the Senate side, was passed by both sides, and then it wound up being vetoed, came back, went up for a vote, and it took that 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate, and it was passed. So it then became a law, even though the governor had vetoed it. So at this point in time with that particular bill, we now have, because of that, a climate council that was created, and that's starting to, our different members are all starting to meet. And this is very exciting because we are now part of the Paris Agreement. Again, there's national, momentum going toward climate change. And we're also, ANA is part of the Vermont Climate Action Association. So it is not hard to just meet and research your legislators online. This is a link that you can use, and you can just click on that link and find anybody. So this is, and if I clicked on this, it would lead you to this website. And so you might, if you're interested, you can copy that one down. But it basically, you can look up a bill, you can look up a legislator, you can look up a committee, and you can see this is basically, it's a very easy to navigate site where you can explore. One of our representatives on the healthcare committee is Representative Mari Cordes. Now, Mari is a big advocate for many, many bills that we have, and you can actually look on the website, find out about her. Her phone number's there, her email's there, the district that she's at is there. You can also, on the website, if you don't remember who your legislator is, you can actually go and find out who your legislator is if you couldn't remember, both federally and on the local level. But she has done all kinds. I mean, I can just go through a list. There's pages of bills that she sponsored just this year. Some of the ones, H49, which is an act to include psychological abuse as a basis for obtaining a civil abuse protection order. There's H85, which requires employment breaks. H93, which establishes a homeless bill of rights and prohibiting discrimination against people without homes. There are transportation initiatives, unemployment insurance amendments, fertility preservation for individuals diagnosed with cancer, Clean Water Act certification, household products. She was a co-sponsor of the act related to prohibiting the involuntary sterilization of individuals with an intellectual disability. I mean, and you all know about the paid family and medical leave insurance. So there is so much just this year that's just, like half a page of the page and a half that she's done, that she has co-sponsored. That doesn't mean that all these bills have passed, because they don't get passed unless there's support of them, unless they're nurses and other people that say, yes, I support, this should happen. Sometimes these bills that are great ideas will just sit there and not do anything, even though they're great ideas, which can be very frustrating. Another person who's a nurse that's on our the House side health committee, so it's the House Health Care Committee, is Representative Leslie Goldman, who is a family nurse practitioner. And you can look at her whole study, how she was, who is this person? She came to Bellows Falls as a family nurse practitioner, started a medical practice, got a master's in public health. So you can actually look at where people came from, the different bills that they've supported, and it gives you an idea, what their interests are. One of the things that has come up in the legislature is, trying to make menstrual products non-taxable, which is something that she was interested in. There are transportation initiatives to reduce carbon emissions. There's, the 48-hour waiting period for firearms. There's 183, the act relating to sexual violence. She's a co-sponsor of, as well as the incremental approach to health insurance coverage, bills about Green Mountain Care. 336 is an act relating to promoting economic opportunity of the BIPOC-owned businesses. So she's very active as well and very supportive of healthcare initiatives. Senator Lyons is really one of our heroes when you think that she has done so much. She is the one that really got the Nurse Compact bill going this year and last year. She sponsored that. It didn't pass last year because we had other illegal things that occurred that wound up making it possible for nurses to practice across borders. So things kind of came to a halt. But she wound up, again, co-sponsoring our S48. She also has a really interesting bill. It hasn't gone very far this year, but it will still be there next year, that is about an ALS registry, Lou Gehrig's. And there's things about chiropractic, alternative medicine that she's proposed. But she is a strong advocate for healthcare reform, universal access, affordability, affordable care and access to care, reducing trauma. Really a remarkable woman and very accessible. You'll get to speak with her today. The Healthcare Committee Chair is Representative William Lippert. So he is a very knowledgeable and man who, one of the things that he's passionate about is just non-discrimination across, BIPOC, across gender issues. He's very, prevents suicide. There are, again, just a whole list of things. One of the ones that we'll talk about briefly is H210, which is an act relating to addressing disparities and promoting equity in the healthcare system. And he is one of the sponsors of that, as well as the act relating to expanding the distribution and availability of opioid antagonists, and an act relating to possession of a therapeutic dosage of buprenorphine, which is one of the things that is aiming at is decriminalizing a therapeutic dose so that people can have a small dose that need it, that are, in programs. One of the things that Ann Donahue, Representative Ann Donahue, she is the vice chair of the Healthcare Committee. She is a strong mental health advocate and is always coming up with ideas to help support mental health, not just for nurses, but across the board. And I'm just going to check real quick, make sure I don't have anybody waiting to come in the waiting room, just my paranoia. Okay, good. All right, so there are many ways that we can wind up speaking to legislators. We can email them, we can write, we can call, we can leave messages when the House or Senate is in session with the Sergeant at Arms, and they will actually deliver the message to offices. And we can contact the governor. There's a contact form where you can contact the governor, you can call. So again, it's easy to find these addresses and ways to reach people. You can look up your state officials online. You can find out who is on any committee, the list of the committee. If you're interested in testifying on a committee, you go to the committee and you wind up looking at who the clerk is and just let them know you're interested in that. You can actually contact your legislator directly, but if you want to testify, one of the best ways to wind up testifying on a topic is to say, when this bill comes up or when this topic comes on, this is something I'm interested on, I would like to testify. And they will save your information and you'll get contacted. You may not have a lot of notice, I will warn you. Sometimes it's only a day or two's notice that you get before you might have to testify. But we really need nurses that are willing to just talk about what their experience has been. And it doesn't have to be something that you give a long spiel on. People just want to hear your story. I'm going to touch on just a few bills. S48, of course, is the adoption of the Interstate Nurse Licensure Compact. So that is past the Senate. It is in the House side now. So it's crossed over. It's in government operations, which is nicknamed GovOps, you might hear. But so I've given testimony on both sides. Nurses are generally supportive of this bill. There are some concerns that are expressed by different people. There's a lot of pros and cons. My testimony will actually be in the next Nurse Connection, so you'd be able to view that, but I can talk about that if people are interested in just hearing that more. But when you look at the OPR survey, I'll give you some basics. The OPR survey has basically said that our Vermont resident nurses, 53% are supportive if there's no increase in our fees, but over 90% are supportive if there's no increase in our licensure fees. So what OPR has done is for this year, there won't be any increase in the fees. So we don't have to worry about that. There's, funds that are available that they can draw from to make sure our licensure fees don't go up for this year. But we need to watch out for the future, for 2 years from now, because there is a plan that they need to recover some of their costs that they're doing for the IT. And so the future license fees could go up. And that's something that when it comes up, we need to be ready to jump on things like that. So if nobody says anything, and these fee bills come up all the time, annually a fee bill comes up. So if it comes up 2 years from now and the fee bill says, okay, we're going to increase your licensure fee by $100, and I'm the only one that says anything, it's not enough. It's not enough. The fees will go up if I'm the only one that says, and I'm, ready to retire. So, hopefully, it'll be you that actually says something. But if nobody says anything, then you'll wind up with increased licensure fees if nobody is there to speak for the nurses. I'm speaking all the time. I'm supposed to be working part-time. I'm working full-time, basically doing this. But it's not just me alone that needs to speak. If it is just me, it is not enough. one of the things that has been useful for people to understand for S48 is that telehealth can be used across borders. It's still governed by where the patient is. So if you're practicing telehealth and you're in Vermont and you're doing that telehealth on a patient that's in Maine, you're governed by the laws of Maine. So people need to know that that is one of the possibilities. So you're basically, you are governed by the laws of the state that the patient is in. So you have to be cognizant of that. So it will make it much easier for nurses who are practicing in Vermont when they have a patient that's discharged and goes across the border to another state to be able to do their follow through with patients that are discharged, that have, you know, problems getting into the hospital, just the follow through. So that's one of the big things. Employers like the compact because of the onboarding, the ease with the onboarding. You know, nursing students like it because, you know, you get past your national exam in this state and you can practice in 33 other states as well. So there's a great deal of flexibility. And there are many nurses that I've heard of that have 2 and 3 different licenses. So that gets expensive over time. So that it's not a silver bullet though that's going to solve our workforce solution, because it's still, people will still be able to leave and do sign-on bonuses, just like other nurses will be able to come into our state and get the sign-on bonuses. But I've already talked probably too long about that. We can talk more if we have time about that later. One of the other ones that's going on right now is H104. So this again has to do with telehealth. So there's a working group that is being created, and this is very active right now. It's passed the House, it's crossed over, it's on the Senate side, it's in Health and Welfare. You could ask our Senator Lyons, who's going to be speaking about this a little bit. But
she's going to speak. She's speaking in the.
This is on H104. So this is.
I'll be back in hours.
So this is it creates a telehealth working group to compile and evaluate the methods for practice of healthcare professionals like us using telehealth. So it is supposed to draw information from health professionals such as nurses, and we need to be very involved. If, you know, do we want this to pass? And if it is passed, we want to be part of that working group and be involved with that. If, you know, we want to know how our practice is going to be affected. So S120, that's the healthcare. I believe that Jessilyn talked a little bit about this. It creates that joint legislative healthcare affordability study committee. So this is, again, opportunities. Now I'm getting down close to my time, so I don't know if we have heard from Andrew yet. H1, or excuse me, 210 is the one that addresses disparities, promotes equity in the healthcare system. So that's about what are the barriers to the equal enjoyment of health that are based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, disability status. There are barriers that are happening that are very frustrating. You know, we want to be able to have health equity regardless of, you know, what your ethnicity or sexual orientation is. So that's what that bill very briefly is about. H49 is what is referred to as the big bill, the budget bill. It includes money for RN scholarships, specifically for students who commit to practice in Vermont and critical occupation careers. It's now in Senate appropriations. It's passed the House. And then there's the H315, which is the COVID relief. It's now a bill. This is now a law. It's not just a bill that's going up. This has been passed both sides and signed by the governor. And it includes money for LPN and, you know, to increase at least 45 more LPN slots in the state. I'm going to just check and see, do we have Andrew yet?
No, Meredith, he texted and said he's still on the way home. He should be in time for the 12 o'clock, but I don't know if he's going to jump in before that.
Okay. And there may be time after the speaker speaks for him to speak. So we'll just have to put him in later. I'll talk for just a few more minutes until, and just keep an eye for the speaker to come on, because I believe that actually it's the President Pro Tempore of the Vermont Senate, Becca Balint, that comes on at noon. So keep an eye out for her. All right, so I'll just keep talking briefly. You can look up the words, the bills by the keywords, as I talked briefly about before. So I'm just going to go through some of these quickly so that you have them. This is just an example of what it looks like. When you put in the number, this is the kind of thing that will come up. And so you can see when the last recorded action, if you go down further, you can actually see, what the committee has done on the bill. I'm just bringing up a picture of the top part of this slide, but you can see who's on the committee. You can email sponsors. You can see what the last action that's happened on this bill is, or if it's passed and become an act at this point. If it's passed one side, if it's passed the other side, all that. These are just some other issues of interest. Like I said, the fee bill comes up, and it comes up fast, and it's just often, if you're watching government operations, OPR, it'll just come up and you need to be watching, because it's like a little quick thing, and it suddenly affects all the costs of license fees. So annually that comes up, and I need to not be the only one looking for that, because I'm going to miss it. It's not, if I'm not watching constantly, and I can't be watching constantly. A thing that has come up multiple times is that an act requiring that at least one member of the Green Mountain Care Board be a healthcare professional. I thought we had this passed last year. I thought it was going to be all set. It passed the Senate side. Guess who brought it up? Senator Lyons. She sponsored this. It was a different number last year, but she brought up this same bill. It passed to the House side, went to the Healthcare Committee, took testimony, and we actually had a group of us, even, the Medical Association and multiple others, that all testified, yes, we need to have a healthcare professional on the Green Mountain Care Board. Because what does the Green Mountain Board do? So I put, just so people don't know. So if you look on this, the Green Mountain Care Board approves hospital budgets. It identifies critical healthcare needs and how to meet those needs. It develops the health resource allocation plan and approves the healthcare workforce plan. So it involves, looking at insurance rates, premium rates, overseeing the all-payer accountable care, insurance, sets financial targets for the ACOs, helps to, focus and achieve the 20 quality measures tied to population health goals, looks at, Medicare and Medicaid oversight. And there's not a single person on that right now that is a healthcare professional. So there used to be, there was for a while, but there is not now. There needs to be. So this is something that, we keep trying to support, but nobody, is like pushing this. So if nobody but one person or two people, push this, it's not going to go anywhere. But if we had, as Juliette put it, if we had 12 nurses that, wound up talking and saying, this really needs to go through, then the committee, I'm sure that the Senate side would vote it through, and it'll still be there. This number will still be there in the next year, because it is the 21-22 session. So this bill will still be S23 next year. And we can say, we're interested, we want to see this go through. And then it goes to the other side. And we really need, if it goes to the Healthcare Committee again, we need to target, everybody needs to target like a representative on that committee and say, I'm from your, a constituent of your state. Would you please see that this gets through? What's the problem? Why isn't this passing? When we talked to the Green Mountain Board people, they were neutral about it. They didn't have a problem with it. It wasn't like they were against it. So what's the deal? So, and I know we're got to keep an eye out for our next speaker, but 332, and I'll stop whenever they come. So just let me know. 332 is about expanding loan repayment opportunities. This is the one that we were talking about earlier with the PAs and the APRNs having this educational, scholarship and loan repayment. So it was really looking to increase the supply of PAs in Vermont to mitigate the nursing shortage. Do you hear that? Increased PAs to help the nurses. So it was giving the preference to the physician assistants to be able to solve the problem so that the nurses could focus on their nursing. So, you know, people need to hear that maybe that's not quite the way to solve the problem. Otherwise, they're going to think, oh, okay, this is what the PAs think. No nurse is complaining about it, so must be okay. You know, when you talk to legislators, it's, you know, I remember a session last year where we were talking, and like Mary Val was there, and you know, Representative Lippert was trying to explain to his committee the different types of nurses, how they're LPNs and associate degree nurses, and you know, regular registered BSN nurses and APRNs. And it's really something that it's hard for some of them to wrap their head around, the different levels of nurses. And they're like, okay, you have an associate degree and BSN, they take the same national test. What's the difference? You know, they don't always get it. So he took some time that day just to try to explain that to the healthcare committee. So this is the healthcare committee who has more knowledge about these kinds of subjects. So understand that a lot of your legislators don't have the background in nursing. They don't know the differences. And it's very helpful if, you know, you say, okay, I'm registered nurse, you know, and this is my other background, you know, this is, but what does that mean to them? So what they're looking at now is how do we fix the workforce and get in like any nurses to be able to solve this shortage that's coming, because they say, oh my gosh, we're not going to have enough nurses. And we know we need to solve the problem. Let's at least get the licensed practical nurses in so that they can begin to take care of the people in the long-term care. And maybe then we can do incentives to get them to become, you know, more advanced RNs and make that happen. But how do we also take care of the nurses that have been nurses for a while, not just the brand new nurses? Anybody? And feel free if anybody wants to say something.
Meredith, we have Andrew is trying. Meredith, Andrew texted. He is trying to get in, and I can't see if anybody else is trying to get in. So you just might want to check to see if Becca Balint's trying to get in.
All right, I am going to wind up stopping my sharing then, if it will let me. There you go. So I'm going to stop my sharing so I can go on and check. I am not seeing Andrew in the waiting room.
He said he's restarting, and if he can't get on, he'll call. So hopefully he's going to, I just texted him to try again.
All right. So, I mean, I could keep on talking about all these different, you know, things that are going on, and, you know, my different frustrations and whatnot, and how we wind up doing that. I did send out this PowerPoint to anybody who registered on the site so that they could, you know, look through and have the interactive process. There's more information about the federal level that, you know, we really don't have time to go in. Maybe, you know, later on, if we have a gap, then we can talk then, but I'm still not seeing Andrew.
Can I say something for just a minute?
Sure.
Hi, my name is Helen.
Hello, Ellen.
Hi, I am a faculty member at Castleton University.
So
I've been in Vermont for almost 2 years, and I am currently in a DNP program online through Quinnipiac University. So I heard about this legislative day, and I'm using this as part of my education in one of the classes I'm taking right now to kind of see what's being talked about and everything. And one of the things that's concerning me is there's all this talk about, you know, let's support LPNs and let's give some scholarship to RNs and let's look at APRNs and all this sort of thing. And because we need more nurses, and gosh, we're going to run out soon. And that's all absolutely important. But what we have to remember is that you're not going to produce any more nurses in Vermont unless you get nurse educators.
That's right.
So we need to also incentivize DNP and PhD programs. We need to look at the income equity in having nurses leave bedside practice and go to education, which significantly cuts their income. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for approaching the nursing shortage from an educator's viewpoint that are being missed right now.
One of the things that I've brought up to legislators every opportunity I get is that when people take go from a clinical hospital position, they wind up, and Senator Balint is waiting, so I'm going to let her in a moment. But they basically take a $30,000 to $60,000 pay cut if they're, like a nurse practitioner level, and then they wind up going to the.
I took a $70,000 pay cut to come here.
Right. I'm going to end. Senator Balint is entering, so I'm going to wind up. Hello, Senator.
Hello. Hey, Juliette.
Becca Balint, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I was a little worried. I don't know if Carolyn reached out to you. We were on the floor of the Senate a little later than I thought. So I'm glad that it all worked out. So
seems like the floor is very busy today, both on the Senate and House side.
Yes, we're trying to get things moved before the weekend. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I thought you'd probably just like to start out, sharing a few things, and then we can just open it to dialogue. This is, you're in control.
Okay, well, great. Well, I will jump in and give you a sense of what I want to talk about here, and yes, save plenty of time at the end. So good afternoon. As some of you may know, I'm Senator Becca Balint. I represent Windham County, and I'm the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And in the history of Vermont, we've never had a woman serve as President Pro Tem. I'm the very first one, which is frankly hard to believe, but there you are. Today, I'm going to lay out a framework and some context for how I view my work, and I'm going to talk about some of the work we've done in the legislature this year, and talk about how you can do your best work when advocating for issues that you care passionately about.
Senator Balint, do you mind if we record this, since we wanted to share this with people who couldn't be there today?
I do not mind. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
Just let me know when you want me to start back up again.
No, I just push the button as long as
Okay.
you said
All
it.
right. Okay, great. And then, like I said, I'll reserve a few minutes at the end so that you can ask questions, but more importantly, so that I can hear really what's top of mind for you, what's feeling urgent. So for those of you who don't know me, I want to just give you a little bit more of a sense of who I am. So I live in Brattleboro with my wife and two kids. I have a teen and a tween and an incorrigible Labradoodle. And my work in the legislature has been informed by many things. So my experience as a historian, as a researcher, as a classroom teacher. I was also an outdoor educator for a while. I'm an avid runner and a hiker, been a longtime social justice activist. I'm a motorcyclist. I'm insatiably curious. Like I imagine many of you, I'm pretty hard on myself and set pretty high standards for myself. And I really try to view my work as the work of someone who is both compassionate and fierce. So I want to just say I've never worked as a nurse, so I can't fully appreciate all that your work entails. And I know I can't even begin to imagine what the past year has been like for everyone who works in healthcare. But as I was thinking about my remarks today, I was thinking about a way in which could find some connection that rang true for me. My mom was an EMT growing up, and in my 20s and 30s, I worked as a wilderness first responder. So I understand the rush of adrenaline that comes when dealing with an emergency. I also know that feeling in my body of the post-adrenaline hangover that comes next. And I understand that fear of making a mistake and that powerlessness when you see someone suffering and you feel like the medical care that you're offering isn't going to be enough. And I know it can be scary and exhausting. So I want to start with really a thank you, thanking you for your dedication, your commitment to your work. I'm certain that we as Vermonters have not thanked you enough this past year for all that you've done to serve your communities. And I want you to know, I represent the Senate. When I come and speak to a group, I'm representing myself, but also all the senators who serve with me. And I know they would want me to say to you that we're so grateful for your service. And I wanted to start with the guts of my remarks today was starting with a quick story about my son, who's 13, and help you understand a little bit more about the lens through which I see my work. So first, a word about my son, so you can picture him. It's been said since he was a toddler that he is basically a mini me. We have similar eyes and chins and smiles. And last summer, in the midst of the pandemic, we took our family vacation closer to home here in Vermont. We rented a house up in South Hero. And every night we'd sit out by the lake and we played Pictionary. And I noticed something kind of remarkable one night when we were playing this game together. And it was the first time I really noticed the way in which my son built his drawings. And this simple observation has given me some unexpected insight into how he and others who are on the autism spectrum may interpret the world. So it was his turn to draw, and his task was to draw a kitchen spatula. And not the rubbery kind that you use to scrape bowls, but the kind for flipping pancakes. And he started his drawing by drawing just a tiny little circle to indicate the hole on the handle that you can use to hang a spatula by the hook. And around the hole, he drew the handle next, and then came the flat head of the spatula. And he looked at me and he said, "Hold on, wait for it." And then he carefully drew the slats. And as he drew the last slat, I yelled "spatula." And it could have been so easy for me to miss the importance of this moment. And I'm certain that as a mom and as a legislator and as a community member, I think I miss important insights into my son and into my community because I'm distracted or I'm harried or impatient or just exhausted. And I think what I've also come to realize is that sometimes we simply have a difficult time understanding that someone else can process information differently and view the world in a way that others do not. So I keep thinking about how he revealed his drawing to me sort of bit by bit. And he built the entire drawing starting from a small hole in the handle. And I know I would never start a drawing that way. And this is an important reminder to me that people on the autism spectrum can view the world and process information differently than someone more neurotypical. So how does this even relate to the work that I do in the Senate? And how does thinking about different perspectives really matter to me as pro tem? And as I said earlier, I'm the first woman to ever serve in this role. And I've heard repeatedly over the past few months just how much it means to so many Vermonters to see me in this role. Vermonters who feel like their voices haven't been heard in the same way that others have. And carrying those experiences and those stories with me is very important to me because I know that we do better work, we make better policy when a more diverse set of people are in the rooms where important decisions are being made. So I wanted to start from this place of reference because I want to make the work that I do here in the State House and my work in the Pro Tem's office, I want to make it more transparent. And as the first openly gay person also elected to the Senate and the first person who is an out queer person to serve as the leader of either chamber, I bring those experiences with me. And as the child of an immigrant, that comes with me into the State House every day. And it doesn't mean that I will do my job better than someone else who has a different experience, but it certainly means that I will bring different perspectives into the work. And so what I've noticed, and it's not just because I'm here alone in the State House, it's kind of a strange session. I'm here, the Speaker of the House is here some days, and other than that, it's empty, the building's empty. So it can be simultaneously quite an exciting job and also pretty lonely. And, you know, when I think about this issue of different experiences, you know, more than once I've had to say to a colleague, you know, your experience is not a universal experience. Whatever it is that you just said, whether it's in committee or on the floor, you are walking in shoes that are very different from mine. And we can learn from each other, but only if we accept this basic truth that we have to expand our thinking beyond what we know and really take into account that people bring with them all of their life's experiences, both in their families and their communities, and that is valuable knowledge. I know that you all were called to the work as nurses because you wanted to make meaningful change. So we have that in common. You want to make meaningful change in the lives of your patients and their families and the communities. And, you know, I'm trying to do a similar thing here day in and day out. And I imagine that we also have in common that some days feel much more successful to you than others. But even on those days when you don't feel as successful, you approach each day with wanting to make a positive change. And that is something we share. So you came to this advocacy day today with your own particular lens and experiences and perspectives, and you care deeply about the impact that public health has on Vermonters. And you care deeply about those pieces of legislation that we're thinking about and trying to move that affect your own practices as nurses. So I want to offer you just a quick update on some of the work that we've done this year that I think you will want to hear about. I'm sure you'll have other questions or comments at the end, or flagging for us other issues that we should be thinking about. So in the Senate this year, we've passed S-48, which is the Nurse Compact Bill. And we've heard from nurses and others across the healthcare sector here in Vermont that we have a shortage of nurses here in Vermont and throughout New England. So we viewed this as an important healthcare workforce initiative. And it was something that we felt addressed a key recommendation that came out of the Rural Health Services Task Force. So the bill allows nurses to apply for a license in one compact state and have access to all the other compact states without applying for separate licenses. And we've heard that this is an important step when making a career choice, you know, where you want to start your career. And we want to make Vermont feel like a place that is much more possible and viable for recent nursing graduates. Another bill I imagine you've been watching closely is H-183, which deals with the issue of sexual violence and consent. And I know this affects the work that forensic nurses do, that SANE nurses do, and in a broader sense, it helps protect members of our community from sexual injury and harm. It passed the House. It's now sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee where they're taking testimony and hearing from witnesses on this bill. So we'll do our careful work, and I hope that we'll be able to get that over the finish line, if not this year, then the second year of the biennium. In the legislature, we're also thinking carefully and continuing our work on health disparities across race and gender and class, and really continuing to address the climate emergency, because we know that health outcomes are absolutely connected to not just racial justice, economic justice, but also climate justice. And my understanding is that there's a subgroup of nurses that also are part of affiliate organizations that see this climate change and health connection. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about here before I turn to questions and comments from all of you is the issue of talking with legislators about issues that are important to you. So I've been told that although you are all competent nurses, some of you don't feel as confident when speaking with legislators to advocate for issues that you care about. So I've thought really hard about some advice that I could give you about how to engage with the legislature so that it feels less scary, for number one, and for number two, so that you might be more effective in your advocacy. So I like to start with this concept of the citizen legislature. So we need to start with this understanding that we in Vermont truly have a citizen legislature. And that means, it means a lot of different things. It means, for starters, we work year round on constituent matters and issues in our home districts, but we're only paid from January to May. So we work well over 40 hours a week during this time and even on weekends, but we're not compensated for all of that. And when you look at the number of hours that we put in over the course of the year, the compensation is quite low for the number of hours worked. Most of us have no staff. I'm the president pro tem. I have one staff member that helps me navigate my work, but it's an incredibly hard job to do without having staff to support us. And so I mention this not because of an, oh, woe is us, but more like, I want you to understand that my colleagues often feel like they are working as hard as they possibly can, and they're not having the impact that they want to have because they don't have the resources and able to be able to do the best job that they want to do. And that feels really discouraging. So most of us ran for office because we want to make a positive change in the world, and we care about our constituents. We care about our home districts. And, you know, I was saying to a friend the other day, on some level, we all feel like our home district is a little slice of heaven, and it's better than all the other Senate districts. So we fight fiercely and lovingly for our people back home. And I want you to think about, when you are advocating for something, when you're trying to connect with a legislator, understand that the best way to make your case is to tie it directly to the people back home in their district. You know, if you start from this awareness, you'll have a little bit more insight into how to be more effective in your role as advocate. The other thing that I want you to think about is that despite their elected offices, most of my colleagues don't actually feel very powerful. Many of them see themselves as servant leaders. They want to do a good job, but they feel hamstrung sometimes by the structure that we've all inherited. The citizen legislature was really created at a time before email, before texting, before social media, before the 24-hour news cycle. And, you know, I think about some of my colleagues who have been here for over 20 years. And, you know, I talked to them, what was the job like before the internet? And they say, well, we answered some calls on the weekends, got a few snail mail letters. People would flag us down at the grocery store. They said, but there was not a tsunami of emails and texts and calls coming in on every single issue. And I understand why we get them. People out in Vermont, they want to have a say in what we're doing. They want to be communicating. And of course, that is when government works best, is when we're hearing from people on the ground. But what I want you to think about is, when every issue is treated as an absolute emergency, what happens on our end is it starts to feel like nothing is urgent or everything is urgent. And either stance can feel pretty paralyzing. So the emergency frame can lose its meaning, which is why it's so important to tie it back to a senator's home district and their people back home, and how it will impact their neighbors and their friends and their constituents, because that's what we're all thinking about when we vote, both in committee and on the floor. So I have a lot more that I could say on that, but I think it will come out in the questions that you have. And I want to make sure I spend plenty of time with you knowing what's on your mind. So I do want to make sure I make it very explicit that I say thank you. Thank you for taking care of all of us. And I truly see how we are all partners in this work of trying to take care of our communities. And I hope that together, collectively, we can continue to keep pushing for better outcomes in healthcare, because frankly, our communities are counting on us now more than ever. And so I was thinking about this sense of connection. I'm a historian, as I said. I'm not a nurse, but I know for many nurses, Florence Nightingale is a hero. And as a historian, she is a bit of a hero for me because I know how her actions in the Crimean War really changed nursing, but also changed our understanding of what good medical care looks like and feels like. And so she said something that I find so profound while she was working in the horrible conditions in the Crimean War. And this is a quote that I try to have guide me in my work too. And she said, "How very little can be done under the spirit of fear." And when we feel fearful, when we feel scared, we don't do our best work. So I encourage all of you on this call to call on each other. We all do our very best work when we can keep fear at bay and use each other as resources to really push our spirit and our courage to face the work ahead of us. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Thanks so much for the invitation to be with you today. Meredith, you're muted.
There.
Meredith.
Thank you. I was just saying, everybody has the ability to unmute themselves that's on the call. They just raise
I
their
love
hand.
the irony of that. Wonderful.
So, but I thank you for understanding, because it has been a tough time for nurses, and a lot of us are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But I want to, before I say something, I'll chip in. I have questions if nobody else does, but I want to open it to some of our people that are on the call first, if they have any question that they'd like to start.
Jump on in. Don't be shy.
I'll jump in if no one will. Hi, Senator Balint. Thanks for being here today. My name is Jessilyn Dolan. I'm the Vice President of ANA-Vermont, and I also am chairing the Government Affairs Committee for the first year.
Great.
So
Wonderful.
this year has been fantastic. I've learned a lot. I've got to see a lot. I'm excited that we're actually going to start a whole working group as nurses. So it won't just be Meredith and I. Juliette's going to join in. My plan is to rope as many nurses in as we can and try to help explain to them pretty much what you just said, is that in this state, we do have that unique ability to have our voices heard.
Yes.
And yes, it might feel intimidating, but we want to find ways to help encourage and coach other nurses to understand how integral their voice is in a lot of the policy making and the decision making that needs to be happen as we move forward, but how almost easy it can be. It could just be an email. It can be a phone call. You know, it could be to the extent of testifying, but that's my goal in the next year, is to reach out to nursing students, to hospitals, to union reps, and to make a larger presence of nurse voices, because we are so integral. And right now, between the pandemic and the elderly, you know, being more of a concern, having the nursing staff as the world turns, I really am hoping that I can help nurses and myself learn to have a stronger voice. And I like how you kind of addressed that. So thank you. And said, not only do we have a voice from that, you know, I'm nervous to talk perspective, but how do I make it more effective and profound? So that's something I plan on working on, which I'm really excited about. But the one thing I wanted to mention, Senator Balint, that I've noticed as a theme in, you know, just since I've been really diving in since January with this session, is how many, it's not just listening to nurses' voices on a already proposed bill and amendment, but having nurses as part of these committees, like the Green Mountain Care Board, having nurses as part of the AI Intelligence Committee that's forming, because we are the most trusted profession, having nurses be part of that 27-person panel that does not include a nurse. So why not add a 28th person to have that nurse perspective, and to remember that we have such a different perspective and different experience, but different knowledge set that we want to have, and we need to have more of a voice, not just to come in and testify and say, yes, we support this, but we need to be on these committees. And how do we make ourselves heard enough? And maybe it is just, you know, Juliette spoke after I did this morning. And, you know, I said 10% of nurses. Juliette said one nurse from each shift or 12 nurses will actually make a difference and be heard. So that's my goal, is to be heard more and to kind of push back on nurses and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to do this more as a team. It can't just be a couple of us. But in that same sense, I want to challenge back to you guys and say, hey, I want you to think of us more. And when there's a 13-person board or a 6-person or a 27-person board, do we have medical representation? And let alone medical representation, I think you know, and we all know, a doctor's perspective is very different from a nurse's perspective, boots on the ground, and from a financial standpoint. And, you know, when you look at
yes, absolutely.
So my hope is to find a way to effectively connect with the right senators, the right legislators, our elected officials, and say, hey, I don't want to wait till we have a bill in and come in and testify.
Yeah.
I want us to be included in more committees. And how do we do that? A quick little example I'll give you is, and one that's dear to my heart because some of the work that I do, I've specialized in opioid use disorder, but I also do a lot of work with herbology and natural therapies. So I work some with cannabis patients. The Cannabis Control Board's taking over the medical program. There's zero medical knowledge, expertise, voices, patients, anything. That's just a prime example of, wait a minute, we have a medical program that has no medical input. And that's just one example of, I'm sure you know many of them too. When I did my speech earlier, I went through probably 10 different examples of committees that we can make an impactful difference. So that's what I've learned. That's what I want to impress upon nurses. And that's what I want to learn to work better with our elected officials like you to say, hey, how can we make this happen? This teamwork is what's going to move these Vermont mountains, and together we really can do that. And we're at a crucial point, whether it's social equity, justice, or climate change. You know, now's the time for us to recognize we're in a pandemic. The only way we are and have been getting through this is as a team and with healthcare providers' voices. And that's what we need to do more of. So thank you for recognizing that. And, you know, as the chair of the Government Affairs Committee, I've learned a lot. I've got a lot to learn, but I really want to start making more of these meaningful connections for myself and other nurses, because I really do think that if we are louder and use our megaphone, we will be heard and we can help make some really fantastic needed change for Vermonters.
Jessilyn, I think that's spot on. And I think what would be helpful for me, I see my chief of staff joined us. If you would send your remarks that you gave this morning, if you're willing to share them to Carolyn Wesley, so that I can look more specifically at what are some of those boards that we should be looking at. Where can we expand? And the other thing, you know, that I want to speak to a really important point that you made, which was, it is, in some ways, it's too late by the time a bill is in committee, right? There's been all of this work that has gone in before that. And so you're sort of coming in, not maybe at the 11th hour, but the train is already in motion, right? And so one of the things that I think needs to happen more out of session is for groups to try to connect with their legislators back home, right? So like, Juliette is in my district, right? So I know her socially, and it's different when people that we know as legislators, as nurses in our communities come and talk to us about issues than it is when we get a full court press from, you know, an organization. Because again, it goes back to what are the needs of the people here. And so those conversations can and should be happening not necessarily in the State House, right? But in the lead up to the legislative session. And I can tell that I can see the wheels churning. And so I'm excited that you're breathing this energy into it, because I think you're right. It's a perspective that needs to be there.
We have a question in the chat that says, I work in dialysis and am very concerned about the ETC model that has been rolled out by CMS. It requires a very large increase in the number of patients that need to be directed to either transplant or home dialysis therapy. If the quota is not reached, there could be up to a 10% reduction in Medicare payment. That could put our dialysis program at a very big risk related to maintaining operational funds. It might open the door for the for-profit big dialysis organizations to come in and take over. This almost happened in 2012. We can talk more. Thanks for all you're doing. That's Peggy Bushy.
Okay, Peggy, thank you so much. I have to say, because it is not, so as pro tem, I sit on 2 committees, and healthcare is not one of my committees. However, if this is a concern that you have, I would encourage you, even if there isn't, it doesn't seem to be an avenue to talk about this right now, I would put it on the radar screen of the chairs of health and welfare, both in the Senate and the House. And if you could CC me on that email, that would be helpful just for me to figure out who else needs to have an eye on this. So thank you for that.
What do you see as the biggest barrier to disparities in healthcare? I know there are many, but where do you start?
Yeah. So certainly we've talked a lot about intersectionality and the sense of, at the intersection of race and class and gender, we see poorer health outcomes. We know this. We know nationally and within rural parts of the state, there's a rural component to healthcare and access to healthcare. And so it's really, you've challenged me, Meredith, to sort of distill it down, which I appreciate. So I'm thinking about, it has a lot to do with this chasm that's grown between the haves and have-nots. And we used to have, when I was growing up, we still had, and so I know I look younger than I am, I'm 53. When I was growing up, there was actually a middle class in this country. And there has been a hollowing out of the middle class. And we see that in health outcomes in our state. And we also, I'm very concerned, Meredith, too, about where we're headed in terms of the number of people in our state who are aging and living in rural areas that don't feel like they have not just good access to healthcare, but those wraparound services that keep them well. And we have the dubious distinction of ranking really, really poorly in terms of older Vermonters living in poverty, both for singles and for couples. I apologize. I am standing right by the blower, and clearly it is blowing some stuff into my throat. So I'm going to close your eyes. I don't want you to get dizzy as I move you to another part of my room here. There we go. That's better. So certainly, as I see so clearly as we see the just looking at the fact that we, compared to other Western nations, don't have the kind of paid family leave, the kind of maternal leave, those things matter long-term, not just for the mom or the dad or the parent who's able to take that time. We know that those health outcomes impact the children as well. I have so many things on my mind right now, Meredith. I could just keep going. I'm concerned too about maternal health as it relates to, we have not moved the dial on cessation of smoking in pregnant women. We are doing terrible in Vermont on that metric. And so, but I think a lot of it comes down to income disparity. I really do. And then when you factor in there, BIPOC and Black Vermonters and LGBTQ Vermonters who do not have a level of trust with healthcare for so many legitimate reasons, speaking as a queer person who's gone to get gynecological care and felt like the person who was giving me care was not aware of how I was approaching my own healthcare. So it is, obviously it's very complicated, but I do think a lot of it comes down to income disparity, and it's very unsettling. And I worry for us as a nation if we do not really look honestly about how this impacts directly health outcomes. So I see Juliette wants to jump in, so I'm gonna stop talking.
I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I didn't feel cut off, Juliette. You know, I'll just keep talking because I love ideas. So I would love to hear from you.
That's a personality asset. Ask me why I think that. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for coming to chat with us today.
Yeah.
First of all, second of all, the term for what you're describing is the social determinants of health that wrap around multifactorial health influences that come into play that are not literally like your diabetes, but how does your transportation affect whether or not you're able to access healthy food, like say hypothetically in a rural food desert in Windham County, you know, and how does that then affect the downstream outcomes of your diabetes? That's social determinants of health is what that is. And we are experts on that. That's nurses, that's our bread and butter. That is what we do. So we have this vast amount of professional expertise on social determinants of health, multifactorial health impacts, also like rural public health equity and access. You mentioned the needs of aging Vermonters. That's also our wheelhouse. The health impacts of climate change you mentioned, also the opioid crisis, all that stuff is like, that is what we do day in and day out. And that is like absolutely our like area of expertise. And we would like to help, you know, and I think that goes back to what Jessilyn was saying earlier in terms of giving us the opportunity to collaborate, because I totally hear you about all of the free 24-hour day work that you're doing and like how incredibly all-encompassing this work is. And, you know, we would like to share the lift on that if the legislature gives us the opportunity. We are great at teamwork, right? Nurses are like, we're sort of famous for that. We're really awesome at working together as a team. We're good at delegating. We're good at like, you know, completing tasks and passing them back. And we would be happy to help work together to promote the health needs of Vermonters in a multifactorial fashion. Because that really is what we as nurses offer that a lot of other modalities don't, is that like that training and that expertise. So like, you know, policy that affects healthcare, but also promoting diversity, attracting and retaining families, because this is one of the major major careers for working families in Vermont, especially in rural areas. This is like one of the main ways that families can make it here. So, you know, when we're considering those sorts of issues, whether it's straight out healthcare, like a lot of the bills that Jessilyn was talking about earlier, or in a broader economic sense, you know, like the long-term economic viability of Vermont, we belong on the boards and the advisory panels that consider those issues. And we would be happy to, in whether it's on season or off season for you, we'd be happy to work together to help figure out the nuts and bolts of things before it's on the floor and it's too late and you're flooded with angry emails from nurses. You know, like we would
supportive
like
emails too, or supportive emails.
But just like Email Mountain, maybe you don't want to climb Email Mountain. I understand that, you know, but in that case, invite us in sooner because we don't know what's happening, you know, before it actually comes out. So if we have the opportunity to collaborate on working parent issues, climate issues, rural population health, all that stuff, we have a lot to offer. And we would like to help.
No, I appreciate that, Juliette. And I know that is something. Thank you for reminding me of the language. I know from coming in and out of Health and Welfare Committee, talking to the chair, I know that's incredibly important to Senator Ginny Lyons. It's something that she also sees as completely intersectional with, you know, her work around adverse childhood experiences, right? So that is those two things. I know are issues, you know, broad issues or umbrellas that she's considering when taking up legislation. But I do think I'm reminded that we're trying to get a bill through. I didn't want to jinx it because it hasn't quite made it through, but we're trying to work on also getting the appropriation for it, which is a bill that is in her committee looking at healthcare reform. And it's clear that as I think about that, so the structure of it is a commission that will go out this summer between legislative sessions to talk to all the different stakeholders about what is and is not working. You know, we're looking particularly financially at what's not working right now, but I'm realizing that our myopia on that may be leaving out really important conversations that you all should be included in. So making a little note for myself on that. So thank you. Really appreciate that.
We have a few more chat notes. So it says the 2020 median income for a Vermont female is $27,057. The average annual income for a Vermont RN is $58,000. So let's educate more nurses. This will not only
Yes.
help the RN workforce, but also address some of the economic issues. Though,
Absolutely.
and it says
Absolutely. And
healthcare related social determinants of health. And I will add to that that we had a conversation before you came on about people that are in clinical settings they actually take about a 30 to 60,000, sometimes more pay cut when they go in to become a faculty educator.
yes, yes.
So it doesn't help.
That's exactly right, Meredith. We have been struggling with this for multiple years now, looking at that issue. We know that that is one of the things that's impacting our ability to sort of open the spigot or the pipeline on more nursing in Vermont. And yes, we're well aware of it, and it is a real challenge. And we're trying to figure out, is there some kind of incentive that we can provide at the state level so that people don't feel like they are taking such an intense pay cut when they go into a faculty position. So trying to get creative around that. We know it's a problem for sure.
And actually, if I can
I keep on
interrupt,
thinking
yeah, one little second, the state of Maryland actually has some really good incentives for bringing more educators into the workforce with scholarship and down the road incentives for things that will entice people to do that. So maybe looking at what the state of Maryland has done might give some ideas.
That would be great. Carolyn, if you're still there, if you could flag that for me to talk to Jen Carby about that. Thanks.
And there's a comment from Samantha about long-term care. She'd like to see more regulations on long-term care nurses to patient ratios. Currently, level 3 long-term care facilities do not have guidance. I would like to see adopted regulations like that of nursing facilities where each resident patient is accounted for a certain amount of time per day so that there is safer ratios for nurses.
And so you said that was from Samantha?
Samantha Gambaro.
And so a question I have, which could either go in the chat or we could talk now. I know some people aren't comfortable speaking on the Zoom. I totally get that. I'm just wondering if there are, oftentimes when we're trying to make a policy change within the state of Vermont, if we can point to a neighbor within the Northeast, let's say, sort of in that catchment area that has a different ratio and they've seen better health outcomes or whatever it is, do you know of a state in our general region that has moved more towards what you're thinking about? And if not, that's fine. I was just curious if you had one in mind.
I don't actually have anything, and I apologize. I probably should have gathered that information prior.
Not at all.
I just, I am currently directing a facility, and I try to do the best that I can, but I would love to see for my nurses underneath me some better ratios that we can kind of adhere to. I know that it was kind of implemented that the nursing home level, they do like 3 hours per resident. And so, how many nurses that you have on to account for 3 hours per patient, where we don't have that in level 3s at all. Yeah, I'll look into that though. And then maybe I can
look into that.
Yeah.
Yes. And so anytime, and would love to hear from all of you about these ideas. And Carolyn is, as I said, my chief of staff. She helps me navigate all the information coming in. So just always, if you send it to me, CC her on it too, so she can help me organize it.
Okay,
great.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And don't apologize for not having my answers at all. I was just curious. Yeah.
I thank you so much for speaking. I am going to have to let our speaker in.
Yes, let the speaker speak. So really lovely to spend this time with all of you, and can't wait till we're on the other end of the pandemic and we can meet in person. So have a nice weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, we have just admitted our next speaker. Thank you so much for coming. Can you hear me? This is the State Representative and Vermont Speaker of the House, Jill Krowinski.
Hi, how
Hi
are you?
there. Thank you so much for coming. And I know you may have a deadline, but we love to have you here for as much as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. Should I just start?
Yes, I don't have a formal introduction. We've kept this rather formal, kind of a fireside chat kind of thing. You can share a little bit about yourself and the things that are important to you. And then if you're up for it, we can just have some questions if that works for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I am the Speaker of the House, Jill Krowinski. I live in the Old North End of Burlington. This is my first year as Speaker of the House, and outside of the State House, I spent a lot of time in my world working for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England in different roles, from communications to policy to education and outreach. My last job was with Emerge Vermont, which is an organization that trains Democratic women to run for office. And I have just been focused this year on my role as Speaker, given the historic nature of where we are governing through a pandemic remotely, has been my main focus. And just preparing for this legislative session, it's been my priority from day one to ensure that we create a plan to get us through this pandemic that leaves no one behind. And that's been a focus for everything from expanding access to high quality, affordable childcare, broadband, and housing have been some critical issues that have come up that we were working on before the pandemic, but were only made worse because of it. And we wouldn't be able to be doing this great work and advancing long-term solutions to build a resilient future if it wasn't for our amazing healthcare workers and the work that you have all been doing on the front lines to get us through this pandemic. It's been incredibly long and exhausting, and I'm very grateful for all the work that you are doing. This session, we have passed and working on legislation that helps build and strengthen opportunities for mental health counseling and for more education. So we created paid internships for education and mental health counseling, compensation to undergraduate students in allied health and education for their internships and practicums. We created some free tuition programs for Vermont state colleges that also are in mental health counseling, paramedicine, some other health fields, and tuition and wraparound services for up to 40 students for certificates in long-term facility care programming. And also we've expanded access through through broadband. One of the things that has come up is the increased use and need for telemedicine, right? Given this pandemic, telemedicine has really become a staple in how we can continue to provide care in a safe way for people. But in this broadband discussion, we know that not everyone has access to the internet, and that sometimes audio only is what is available. And so we passed a law early this session that the governor signed that has health insurance covering audio only appointments too. I think that's really critical and important. And so we are continuing to do our work this session, and would be happy to hear any questions you may have, or thoughts or feedback.
Representative, I just wanted to make sure, is it okay if we share a recording of this? I wanted to ask at the beginning just for this short. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just wanted to have your permission.
How are you all doing?
Just so you know, our latest survey shows that about, well, you probably have seen the results, that about 53% of Vermonters that have answered the survey are overwhelmed and exhausted and really struggling. and about a quarter are depressed. But we're actually doing better than the national average with finding meaning in our work. More Vermonters than on the national average find a lot of meaning in our work when we look at our survey results. So, I mean, you are the Speaker of the House. A lot of people are also very, how they don't know about advocacy and how that happens. Can you just tell, how did you ever become the Speaker? How did you get into advocacy?
Well, that is a great question. And so I went to school to be an urban planner, and I've always had an interest in helping to build and strengthen communities. And I spent some time looking at, when I graduated, a friend of mine was like, you got some time on your hands before you go to grad school, you should work on a campaign. And I was like, I'm not into politics. That's not my thing. I'm about working in local government. And they said, you just really should try it. You'll learn a lot. It's a short time frame. And so I ended up going for it and joined this organization called 21st Century Democrats, which is kind of like the AmeriCorps for the Vermont Democratic Party for young people to get trained on how to do grassroots advocacy. And they said there's a couple of states that are looking for young Democrats to work in, and Vermont was on that list. I was then living in Pittsburgh, and this is a very long time. It was like right around civil unions, and the Democrats had lost the House because of civil unions. And I remember that vote, even though I wasn't in Vermont at the time. And I just thought it was so incredibly amazing that there were people who voted their conscience despite incredible pressure and threats that they would lose their House seat, and they made that vote anyway. And I just thought that courage and that conviction was something that was worth helping to fight for. And so that drew me to Vermont. So I moved from Pittsburgh to Springfield, Vermont, which was quite the transition. But I fell in love with Vermont and I never left. And so I never saw myself as someone who would run for office. I always saw myself as someone who would encourage other people and back them up and knock on doors with them and make phone calls for them. And when the seat became available, the current rep had decided to take this amazing job opportunity abroad. And I got a call and they said, you're always telling other people to run. Like, this is your turn. You should do this. And it took about 6 people to tell me that before I made the decision to put my name in for the appointment. And it's a whole process. And Governor Jessilyn appointed me to the seat in 2012.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And, we have people who are in the healthcare profession that serve in the legislature. And so if you've ever thought about taking a run at some point for any office, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you for speaking with us today. My name is Jessilyn. I'm the Vice President of Vermont ANA, and I work chairing the Government Affairs Committee. So it's been a lot of learning curves for me and excitement as we continue to build more of a committee and try to have nurses' voices be more profound to help, kind of from that grassroots level, make some of the needed changes. So one of my goals in the next year or so is to really find out how to work better and with you guys and to be heard more. So I would always ask for any suggestions you have to give us as Vermont ANA and as the Government Affairs Committee to reach out to you, to make those connections, to be, and the theme that I've been talking about today is being a part of it from the beginning, not waiting till a bill is in session and we come in and comment on it, but more so, how can we help the process? How can we be on more committees and more advisory boards and really have a bigger impact? So that's my question to you is, what advice can you give us as nurses to be heard more, to speak up more, to be more change agents than we are right now? How can we help and be a bigger part of the picture? If you have any suggestions or advice with that.
Absolutely, 100%. What I would say is, so we're getting at the tail end of this legislative session. We have about a month left, if that. So what I would say moving forward is, as you come up with your priorities for next legislative session, to have you have a very strong start, is to meet with me and to meet with the pro tem and tell us what your goals and priorities are. I have my virtual office door is always open. And I would also recommend sitting down with the relevant committee chairs, healthcare, human services, and talking with those chairs before the session starts to talk about what you're interested in. Also, as you build those relationships, making sure that you're sending out regular updates on where things are and any flags or concerns you may have, and offer to the chairs to be a resource to testify as well. I'm sure that, have you testified yet in the committee?
I haven't this year, but I have multiple times before, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so being a resource to be called on when we're taking up relevant legislation. And, I will say that emailing us with any ideas or thoughts or feedback as we go along to keep a dialogue going is really important. And when legislators hear just in general from constituents, I mean, even if someone gets 5 emails from a constituents on a topic, it's meaningful. So I've seen people change their minds on a vote because, they got a couple more emails from constituents sharing their personal stories or their expertise. So I highly recommend just increasing your outreach, and know that we're always looking to hear from people and to get more input and to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table.
And when would that make most sense? Because I know most of the time you guys start in January. So should we be reaching out to you in November? Should we wait till January? When is the best time for you?
Yeah, great question. I highly recommend like November, early December. Because what happens is we set our priorities for caucuses throughout the fall. October, November, December, that's the time when we're working on bills and setting priorities. So I would recommend that time frame as well.
Our president on the phone, I think, has a comment for you. This is Andrew Kehl.
Hi there.
Hello.
There.
Hi.
Sorry. So Representative, I wanted to, I guess, bring a concern that I had. So in terms of the federal stimulus money that is coming into the state of Vermont, seems like a lot of the funding is going to larger healthcare facilities, or it's not going to the primary care areas. So I work as a nurse practitioner. I work for Central Vermont Medical Center. But during the initial part of the COVID pandemic, we were struggling to even have a facility to see patients. So we ended up seeing patients in our parking lot in tents. And then that slowly evolved to having shipping containers brought in, basically mobile offices. But none of those facilities are reasonable to be seeing patients, and you can't give them the same quality of care that you can give them if they're in a proper office. So what I noticed, because I also work at UVM Medical Center, was it seemed like a lot of money was being spent on inpatient facility retrofits, and none of it was being spent on outpatient retrofits. And what we now know about COVID is that there's a large burden on primary care providers and primary care facilities to see these patients before they need the inpatient care. So I was wondering, in terms of the House and how they're appropriating funding, what are you looking at in terms of the needs assessment and in terms of hearing from providers, okay, this is where we need the money to go to?
Yep, that's a great question. And what I'll start by saying is that, you know, the money that we got from the federal government in the first wave, the CRF funding, was funds that we had to get out the door ASAP. They had a deadline, and we had to act quickly, so that we didn't lose any of the money. The new money, from the ARPA money, that is now here has a greater timeline on it than before and more flexibility, which is super helpful for us, which means that we don't have to rush and make through a ton of decisions with not all the information that we necessarily would typically have or we would want. So what we are doing is ensuring that we take our time to do the good work and find out what are the needs out there in Vermont. What can we learn from the money that we've already invested? What worked? What didn't work? How can we build back better and stronger? And while we're doing this, at the same time, the federal government's working on an infrastructure bill that looks like it may cover an additional sector that I think is important for us to think about as we make decisions about the ARPA money, right? Because there might be funds that are directly allotted to infrastructure projects like what you are talking about for build outs. So I think right now we're getting the money out the door for the places that we know we need it most, like sheltering low at risk or homeless Vermonters, putting out emergency outreach grants for mental health, making sure that we're getting funds to designated mental health agencies and so forth. So what I would say is keep advocating and keep raising your voice as we work to figure out how best to get this money out there. And that's going to be really important.
Thank you.
I see that Senator Lyons is here, and she may be, I'm guessing she's your next guest here.
Yes, she is our next guest.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with all of you. I really appreciate all you're doing, and please know that we have your backs. And if there's anything that you need or you want to talk more about, my office door is open. Like I said, don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
Thank you so much for being a part of us, Representative Speaker.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hello, Senator Lyons. I know it's a little bit early, but I see that you came in early. I wanted to also let you know that the House was running long, so we may not have Representative Mari Cordes or Representative Goldman, because Representative Lippert, the chair of the Healthcare Committee, is stealing them away right after they have their House time. So you may get to dominate this discussion, but I know you can handle it because you're an amazing woman.
This is such a busy time of the year. I have to tell you that I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm happy to talk with folks and have a conversation and get into a discussion. Very much look forward to that. I will say that as you were welcoming me, I was on a phone call with my chair of my afternoon committee, and who's looking for me to be there without, in a 15-20 minutes. So we'll be good.
Well, it's good we let you in early and you get the time, so that's
You're
good.
absolutely right. I really appreciate it.
So, well, I just want to thank you so much for being here, and I wish you had more friends to join you, but like you said, things are so busy, and I guess the House went really longer than was expected because we were expecting to have some other people here to
Right.
join you, but I would love, you are just one of our champions when it comes to healthcare and the things that you do. You sponsored our compact. I mean, I noticed that the ALS registry hasn't moved yet, but I have hopes for next year. And I know that, that's not lost yet, but you always have such amazing insights when it comes to healthcare that few legislators seem to have, and you always are very knowledgeable. So, and I think part of that is your willingness to be a part. And I would just love you to share what are your big concerns, and that are coming up. You could just talk about some of the things that are most important to you, and also what helps a bill make it through your committee would be another thing.
Terrific. Well, first of all, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I can't tell you how much regard and respect I have for nurses individually and as a community overall. The more involved I am with the healthcare boots on the ground world, the more I realize that nurses really are the bottom of the pyramid and really hold up our healthcare environment. I'll share with you that my husband was an ear, nose, throat surgeon. And when he was in medical school, he said, as he got into clinical work and he started getting into the ER and other OBGYN and other places, he said, I learn more from the nurses than I have in my classes. And he always says that. So even when he started his work in the hospital and his practice, he continuously blames the nurses for everything he knows. And for me, that's really a tribute, because I highly respect his abilities as a physician. My own background, I taught at Trinity College for many years and began and oversaw many allied health programs. And the one regret that I have is that Trinity closed. And when it closed, we did not have a nursing program or an affiliated contact with a clinical partner. So, nursing is, I think nurses could rule the world. Don't tell the nurses that. And I know you're all listening. But so as we've gone through some of our bills recently in our committee, I probably should share with you a little bit of some of our recommendations that we've sent off to the Appropriations Committee. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the bills that you have raised and a couple others. And then happy to talk about what helps a bill get through my committee. So I'm glad to do that and answer questions with folks. So this year I'll start with the nurse compact bill because it is a bill that we passed last session before COVID hit us. And after COVID hit us, I can talk about that in a little while. But the nurse compact bill seems critically important to allow for some flexibility in practice across state lines. And I truly hope that the House committee that currently has it, it's the Government Operations Committee, will act on it and pass it back to us. Because I think it's important to get started on that and Vermont to be engaged in that process. We all know how expensive it is to have traveling nurses. And maybe this will help. There's no way to know whether it's going to help or not. But I think if there's any hope for our state to increase nursing, one of the things that can do it is to have the compact go through. There are other areas that we've been working on over the past couple of years, not the least of which are nursing and primary care scholarship programs and loan repayment programs. And this year, our committee actually just recently sent a memo over to the Appropriations Committee. It's our job to inform the Appropriations Committee about what things we believe are important for funding in our state in the healthcare world. And we included at the top of our list support for funding and scope of the healthcare workforce. So what we put in, I'm looking at what our recommendations were for money, but we asked to have the scholarship program that's currently for nursing and primary care expanded to APRNs. And so we can have more flexibility and more people involved in primary care, because we're losing primary care right now, and particularly in the more rural parts of the state. So we need to emphasize supporting people who will work in the state as primary care practitioners, whether they're docs or APRNs or others. And nursing is such a critical part of that practice. We asked for an additional $1.2 million over the $2.2 or $3 million that we had, that was in the budget. So we've asked for additional monies to support nursing scholarships. The criteria for that, of course, will be, some responsibility for staying in the state and working in the nursing world, but it's money well spent. And I really hope that part of the budget goes forward. And I will continue to advocate for it. There is also a section on loan repayment, knowing that there are some nurses currently in practice who have a debt and with a loan repayment would stay here in this state. So we've added was it about $1.5 million into the loan repayment program. It's not just for nurses, but it will be an expanded group of primary care folks all together.
Lyons, excuse me, I neglected to ask you if it was possible for it. Do you mind if we are recording you? Wanted to make sure.
I'm recorded every day, so
no, but I just still wanted to ask your permission. And if there's
fine.
an opportunity, the president, Kehl, our president for ANA-Vermont, wants to ask you a question when there's a moment.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy to take questions whenever, because I'm a senator and I will talk forever unless you interrupt. So is there a question now, Meredith, or?
Andrew?
I didn't have a question for Senator Lyons, so she can continue. That was an old text.
Okay, that was a previous text. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So, one of the, as we look at, what will it take to increase nursing workforce in our state? So the scholarship and loan repayment initiatives that we have, and the nurse compact bill and program, all of those things are meant to encourage folks. Obviously, when you start to dive down into it a little bit, and we look at one of the things that I've recommended is to look at the barriers for our state colleges, to look at why we can't have more seats, more positions in our nursing programs. And when you ask that question, then you start to see things like, well, we have insufficient PhD nurse professors. And then it goes right along, keeps going. So there's another step and another step. But for me, if we can keep people working in the state, and we can continue the interest in attending nursing programs for RN or LPN, any level nurse, we have the need throughout our state. So trying to track down what those barriers are and eliminate them becomes a Herculean task. And that's where, Meredith, I think you and your organization has been extremely helpful to us in informing us what works and what we can do to increase our workforce. So that's some of the stuff that we've been doing around nursing specifically, and I'm happy to answer questions. There certainly will be more as we go forward. Today, we passed out a bill in our committee that will send a task force around the state to look at how we can increase both the affordability and accessibility of healthcare in Vermont. And I expect to hear a lot from people about primary care. I expect to hear a lot from people about low wages for our practitioners and how can we make more equitable our reimbursement for various practitioners, regardless of level and education. I also, and of course, we're going to hear from the people who are paying high premiums and co-pays and out of pocket. But for me, it's a broader question. To make something affordable and accessible, you need to have the workforce in place, and you need to ensure that that workforce is adequately reimbursed so that you can live in our state. So that's a bill that I'm very optimistic about. As a task force begins to travel around the state, whether virtually or in person this fall, we'll be listening to people. And I hope that some of you will provide input to that process. And I'm happy to talk about it if you have questions, but that bill, I think it's not just about nursing, it's about all of our healthcare reform needs.
So Senator Lyons, I did actually have a thought.
Terrific.
So my name's Andrew. I'm the president of ANA-Vermont. I'm a registered nurse. I work in a ICU, and then I also work as a family nurse practitioner in a express care. So when we are looking at the workforce issues, one thing that I noticed that's always mentioned is we have X amount of nurses that are graduating from Vermont nursing programs a year. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but maybe 200, 240. And that number is just put out there as if these 200, 240 student nurses, now graduated nurses, are expected to enter the Vermont workforce, but half of those nurses are from either UVM or Norwich program, which recruits heavily from outside of the state of Vermont. Whereas VTC, for example, has 130 nurses that graduate as RNs every year. So in terms of looking at where to put money to develop the workforce, I think that it's important to channel the money to the programs which are already recruiting Vermonters to become nurses, because we know that if you live in Vermont, if you're already here and then you decide to become a nurse, you're more likely than not to actually stay in the state because you already have roots in the state. So I think that that's something that should be considered when we consider where are we targeting these funds, our limited funds to develop our workforce. If we target it to Vermonters that want to become nurses, they will more likely than not stay in the state of Vermont, work as nurses because they already have roots here.
So, you have raised a very critical point. And one of the things that maybe I should have emphasized a little bit more regarding the scholarships and the loan repayment is that those are only available to folks who promise and to stay and work in the state. So and targeting someone who lives in Vermont and wants to stay in Vermont certainly makes a lot of sense. But the program is designed so that you have to practice here for the same number of years or more that you have received the benefit. So you're absolutely right. The other thing is there may be a way to link these programs with I call them kids, but young people who have been sort of drafted through the AHEC program, and knowing how AHEC has done such a good job. And I should let you know that I've been on the AHEC board, and I've also been on the loan repayment board. So I'm speaking in some somewhat of a biased position, but I do know that the summer camps and the educational programs that AHEC has provided to kids, I think, and getting them into nursing and other healthcare areas has been really important. And perhaps they're the ones who can be supported. So there are a lot of options here. I think we're just really learning how we can keep people in the state and reward those who are here. So thank you for your that's really very important. And as we go forward, I'll certainly keep that in mind.
And also,
Thank you for your time.
as you look at loan repayment, don't forget about those not just becoming nurses, but those that you want to advance in nursing. So
Yes.
I think that there's legislation out there about APRNs, but you spoke of the need to increase enrollment in nursing schools.
Yep.
And you also recognize the need for more PhD or DNP nurses.
Yes.
So that loan repayment or those incentives for that population of the nurse that could be advancing their education to produce more nurses is going to be key as well.
Yes, across the board. And the need right now in the state, I forget the number, but it's thousands. We have a deficit of thousands of nurses.
It's about 5,000.
Is it 5? I thought it was somewhere in that area. Yeah, okay, it's 5,000. So that's a lot of nurses. And that's a lot of people. I mean, just think about it. I don't know how many kids graduate from high school each year, but it's 16,000, I think, right now, the number of kids that we have in high school, close to that. And please, I know, don't quote me and don't record me on that, but I don't know the number, but I know it's significant. The number of nurses compared to the number of kids graduating is pretty significant, the need. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I know working for Castleton University, there were plans in the way to try to reach some more of those high schoolers and maybe increase their interest in nursing as a career path. And then COVID happened and we had to stop those plans. So hopefully in the next year or two, we'll be able to have some of those camps ourselves and teach them what it's like to be a nurse and maybe pique some of that interest in them and get them into, we're interested in them becoming Castleton nurses because we are the state school for the BSN program.
Yes, you are.
What Rutland and SVMC want to have. And I think there's so many opportunities. We just need to have the funding and the people to do them.
Yes. And, this is where AHEC has been so effective at giving an awareness about what nursing is all about. And I should let you know that I taught at Trinity College for many years. And one of the things that I did when I was there, this is quite a bit ago, probably in the 80s, 90s, before AHEC actually started in the state, I began a program where I brought young women into our college, that's sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school, to help them understand what it meant to be a young woman in allied health or in the sciences. And I think that is so effective. They learn that what amazing opportunities they have. And having all of that happen at Castleton, where you have such a rich environment that can include some clinical exposure, I think is so awesome that you're doing that, to tell you the honest truth, because I think that is one of the things that will allow for us to expand our nursing workforse. So,
yeah, thank you. We're excited by it.
you should be. We should be very excited. And COVID just sort of stepped in the way. And I mean, when COVID hit us, March 6th, I think, was kind of the last day we were in the State House, and then March 13th. I started running my committee by telephone and then moved to Zoom. and on weekends as well as during the week, and trying to sort out how can we keep the business of healthcare going during this horrific time. So I did hear Speaker Krowinski talking about the CRF CARES funding and the ARPA funding. So I won't go into that, but there's hopefully some opportunity.
I think the education setting has been really challenging in the nursing profession right now, because all of a sudden, students weren't allowed in hospitals there for a while. And there was a lot more telehealth that happened, and they were learning that, but and simulation became much more prevalent, but it can only be so much. And one of the things that always comes up is preceptors in nursing. How do we, right now, preceptors are usually free. They're volunteering their time for the nursing students. And if there are incentives that we can have, even if it's just tax credits for those preceptors that are winding up taking on students, that might be a possibility. Just to in your future thoughts of how do we support, future generations of nurses. And as we go forward with the compact, I think it's going to be critical for us to have an attractive home state. So if we can do something that attracts nurses to us being the best home state, okay, if you come to, the governor has these incentives for workers to come for $10,000, but it could just be, if you make Vermont your home state, you don't have to pay, as big a licensure fee. It could be just a critical, what are those incentives? Like almost a sign-on bonus, but in a different way, could be helpful.
Yes, I think that was, I don't know whether it was you or someone else, or just part of our discussion in committee when we passed the bill, where we actually talked about that. What incentive can we put in place? And I talked about it with the head of OPR, so that perhaps there is some reduction or some tax incentive. Tax incentives are very difficult. I'll tell you that right up front, as you probably know. But something to consider and just wrap our minds around that. It's such a, yes. How do we get nurses in the home state they belong? Right here. Very much so. So all of those ideas that you have, I know that you'll write me a letter and I'll be able to see it. Thank you.
Senator Lyons, thank you for being here today. My name is Jessilyn. I'm Vice President of Vermont ANA. I also chair the Government Affairs Committee. And I just quickly, I know you have to go, quickly wanted to mention what we've spoken to, or what I've spoken to a few times today, and what I've not only learned in the last year, but kind of have seen as a theme by chairing the Government Affairs Committee and watching legislative process. So I want to just quickly mention more that macro than micro level, and how can we have nurses have a larger voice, not just waiting to come in and testify and not just shooting an email, but how can we be included on more committees, advisory boards? You mentioned H210, which has a 27-person committee about to be formed. Why not have a nurse on that? Why not add a 28th? We're talking about disparities in healthcare. Who better than nurses with boots on the ground? So what can we do to help you guys recognize and start putting nurses more into being built into those committees and advisory boards, so that we have more of a foundation to help create this, rather than come in after it's created and then give ideas and work in that way? So how can we, from that macro level, really have a larger voice and share our perspective?
You've actually just done it. And what I need to know, as I go through my committee process and hear about our different advisory or wellness committees or whatever they are, I just need to know that, yes, the nurses would like to be involved. And having that as a foundation for our discussion is critically important. It also is important that you, as you keep an eye on what we're doing, that you do send an email and say, remember us? We get so swamped. Just seriously, today, going through 5 or 6 different bills to finish our work. If I had heard that from you, you would be there. And if you want to be there, let me know. We'll do an amendment next year. I'm very happy to have you engaged in the work.
Well, you will definitely hear from me
I
then.
don't know which committees you'd like to be on. You know, if you want to be on the Transportation Committee for Special Services, let us know. That's the only way that can happen. So, and if there's a baseline, we want to participate in whichever group, you know, let me know, please.
You will hear from me. Thank you very much.
Oh, darn. That's good. I'm glad. Thank you. So yeah, no, that's, I must say that because we're not in the State House, it's quite a challenge to stay in touch with people. And ordinarily we'd be sitting in room 10 or 11 right now together, and there'd be more folks who we could directly connect with. And during the day and during the week, it's frequent that I have someone come into my room and say, you know, by the way, can I come in and testify? Or just as you've done, Jessilyn, to say, by the way, our group should probably be represented here. So we intend to be back in the real world next January. So perhaps we can have a better connection. So thank you. Thank you for that. Juliette, did you have a question earlier? Or?
Not so much a question as a comment on, well, I was going to say part of what Jessilyn said so well, so I'm not going to repeat that, but also just having you take these issues so seriously is really meaningful for me as an RN who's now soon going to be graduating as an FNP in Southern Vermont, and I'm very deeply rooted here and never leaving. And so a lot of the obstacles that I face economically as a young working mom in rural Vermont, that is a big hill to climb that we don't necessarily face in other areas. And so having you take it seriously, you know, loan repayment and licensure fees and what it costs to live here versus like the rate of wage growth is, you know, there's a pretty significant mismatch that we in Vermont face as a state with one of the highest costs of living in the country, especially in rural areas where, you know, like where I live, where we just have so little access to things that are, you know, pretty commonly like Burlington, people in Burlington and Montpelier have a very different resource picture from what I have in Windham County. So I am really excited to be doing rural primary care down here, but
thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's a thrill. Don't thank me. I'm thrilled. It's an honor. And also anything that you can do to help us stay here. Cause like, I mean, I have a lot of friends and colleagues over the years. I've worked in a bunch of different hospitals in Vermont, and I see nurses leaving or thinking about leaving, but leaving. New Hampshire, Maine, places that the pay is higher, the cost of living is lower. It's easier to raise a family, just logistically speaking, and like own your home and that kind of stuff. And we want to be here. You know, I don't know a lot of nurses who are leaving because they think that the grass is greener. They're leaving because economically it's a really hard place to make it work. And we do not have a strong middle class here. And, you know, one of the things that you can really do to support us is taking a real hard look at the loan repayment and, you know, any tax incentives, which I recognize are hard, but anything that you can do to help nurses hold on. I think it supports keeping young families here. It supports growing our middle class. It supports keeping someone in place to help care for our elders. But it's also like, we're the people doing the actual rural public health stuff, doing the, like, looking at the social determinants of health, making sure that our community is well resourced. And we need the support from the powers that be to allow us to keep doing that work. So, you know, like, some of the loan repayment bills that have come through have had some problems in them. There was one that was privileging PAs over APRNs, which is and that was a House bill that didn't make crossover. But just having that frame in place at all can be really, it can be hard for us to see as nurses, but it also, if something like that comes into place, we are actively disincentivized from going into primary care. And it makes it really challenging. Another one is, that a lot of the loan repayment programs look at what school did you go to? Was it in Vermont? But then if you want at the same time to have more seats at Castleton, you need to incentivize online programs and out-of-state programs and base it on residency and not the location of the school itself, because there just aren't a lot of options for master's programs, PhD, DNP. Like if we want primary care providers and nurse educators in Vermont, we need to be looking at where are you going to live? And can we convince people to move here on the basis of a residency-based loan repayment program, as opposed to specifically incentivizing people who graduated from Castleton and UVM? But I think that is a really good direction to go in terms of generous loan repayment to help us stay here. And I think another piece of this is that a lot of times people outside of nursing talk about like doctors and nurses, right? You'll hear doctors and nurses and like feel like that covers us like sufficiently. But unfortunately, because we are an alphabet soup of professions, we have to really explicitly include those PhDs, DNPs, and APRNs in anything that's happening, because otherwise we're left out of the incentives when push comes to shove.
So Juliette, it sounds like you'll be testifying in my committee. I would write up everything you just said, because as we're going forward and we're trying to put some nuance into our loan repayment or our scholarship programs, you've just said a whole lot that will be very informative and very useful. And now I've got it. I think I got most of it, because some of it I sort of knew about, but hearing it from you makes it much more powerful. And yes, seriously. The other thing I will say is, as you're talking, and I'm thinking that we just finished our work and passed a bill out on childcare and increasing reimbursement rates for childcare providers to keep them in the state and to keep positions open. There you have it. And then and keep and have some increased fundings, what's known as the CCFAP funding for parents, so that there will be childcare, and secondly, people will be able to afford it. So those things are ancillary to what you're talking about, but certainly consistent with having a cost of living that you can afford. So, wow, this is terrific.
Thank you for just letting Juliette know how powerful her words would be. That's one of my goals to chair the Government Affairs Committee in the next year, is to let nurses know and really grasp how important their voices are and how powerful they really can be. So thank you. That's what we've been telling Juliette, and she's now on the Government Affairs Committee with me. Okay. And my goal is to really impress upon nurses that their words are powerful. So thank you for recognizing that.
Well, thank you. I truly mean that. And I truly believe that having you come into committee either alone or with a group will make a lot of difference as we're looking at these issues, and not just my committee, but the Appropriations Committee and others in the healthcare world in the House. So thank you. Good. Meredith, is there anything I'm missing? I think this is kind of fun for me. I mean, really enjoying being here and talking with folks. I can't make promises, but I certainly can understand the issues that you're facing and then try to solve some of these problems.
I think you're doing fabulous. And, I love that you encouraged Juliette. We've been telling her, like Jessilyn said, you really need to talk and share, because it's, you need to be heard. Also, just, what helps that a bill get through your committee? Just what are those, what tips could you give people?
So I will say this, I think that having some foundational knowledge about the bill, so if there's a bill in and whatever it is as it relates to you, to provide some concrete factual data and information, and then also how it affects people, how it affects patients, and how it improves care. how it makes care accessible, how it makes care affordable. Those things are very important to us. So that's just the informational piece, and you're the experts in that. But then beyond that, it's being careful not to be overly intrusive. So we listen. We usually don't forget who has been in committee and what's been said. But if you keep an eye on the bill and you see, gee, they're going through this bill and maybe they forgot this piece, just a little as a reminder, just in case you lost this information, here it is. But I guess all of which is to say, please don't be a pest. Pests are not welcome. We don't like the little creepy crawlies around, but it's not so much that we don't want to hear, it's that we're so engaged in listening to so many people that once you've provided that information and you have a cohort of people and patients you're representing, of professionals and patients you're representing, we understand that. And then communicating with the chair about how to make your testimony relevant to the committee that's there and then to the topic, I think is also important. I mean, that I can't say much more than that. I think it's a matter of using really good judgment overall and how you want to pursue a topic. And don't be afraid of checking in and just saying, how's the bill going? What more can we do to help? That is a helpful thing to say. And I guess, or is there someone on your committee who we should perhaps speak with who might need some more information? So it's good. Meredith, is there anything further on that? I think that's just from the testimony side, and then trying to stay connected, but in a respectful way. I have had sometimes witnesses or organizations that will contact me, and I'll say, we will take this bill up later and we'll ask you to testify when we take it up. And then 2 months later, we haven't taken the bill up, but someone will complain that we haven't contacted them. And it's, please don't complain about not being contacted, but just say, do you know when the bill will be taken up? I'm still here and I'm happy to help. So.
Sounds good. Are there any other questions? I have one more question if nobody else has a question, but I'll put it out there in case there's anybody else first. I'm going to ask one that relates to what is the biggest barrier to disparities in healthcare? I know it's a big question, and it's to try to, what do you see as some of the biggest hurdles? I mean, I know it's a huge.
Well, thank you for that question. There are many. So we've talked about workforce, that's one. And then there are little tiny barriers around each one. So not having enough places for people to study, or not enough teachers and scholarships and money, the resources to get to have people go through. But if I look at the healthcare picture itself, for me, what's really critically important is making sure that patients have a care management, and that when they are in wherever they begin, whether it's with their primary care, with a hospital, or with a counseling service, that whatever next step they need, that there's someone who is helping them move from one place to the other. I do see your role as really very central to that. I do know that, social workers are also central to that. But I think every single care provider is central to that. So having that care management piece in place is so important, and allowing for the mobility then of patients from one place to the next and one level to the next, whether it's a step down situation or whether it's a acute to chronic care situation, whatever it is, to a rehab, to making sure that regardless of who the patient is, that patient moves flexibly. And then on the workforce side, for me, it's the whole issue of reimbursement and having equitable reimbursement across the board. The inequity that we currently have in our system is untenable. And I continue to worry and work on that. So those are the policy, the higher level things that I think about. And I just worry so terribly about people who can't afford their health care and the practitioners who can't afford to stay in business. So it's all about our economic base and our economic environment. I think I could hit about 20 other things, Meredith, but those are the things that I worry about a lot.
We worry about the workforce too,
Yes.
very much, and trying to make it a more appealing place where people can be safe, where there's not violence, you know.
Yes, yes.
You know,
And we're going to be working a little bit on some of the child abuse and neglect issues that have come up recently with the Kern-Hatton School. That's one of our goals for the Child Oversight Protection and Oversight Committee this fall. But that once you have a culture of support and protection for children, you also have it for families, and then that enables a more stable workforce.
certainly helps.
So I can't thank you enough for allowing me in to talk with you. If there's something else, I'm happy to answer another question, but I probably should go to my committee.
Thank you so much for
I'm
spending
being
the time.
negligent.
I know that you're late to the committee and that you've spent extra time with us, and we so appreciate you taking the time to listen to nurses. We
Well,
value that tremendously.
thank you for listening to me. I don't get a chance to talk. I don't get a chance to share this way unless I'm asked to do it. So when I'm in committee, I listen, and I value the listening because that's how I learn all the things that I'm sharing with you. So thank you all. And thank you for having me. Okay. I'm going to scoot.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye. Andrew, you didn't really get a chance to speak earlier because you were injured. How are you doing?
So I'm good. I mean, I was just trying to change my lawnmower blade and then cut myself, but I'm all stitched up, and it'll be all healed in about a week. So I guess I'll just introduce myself for the group. So my name's Andrew Kehl. I work as both a registered nurse and a family nurse practitioner. The first part of my nursing career started in 2013, and I worked in the medical ICU full-time all the way up until 2019. And then in 2019, I ended up getting my family nurse practitioner certification and APRN license. So now I work primarily at Central Vermont Medical Center in the express care. Outside of nursing in Vermont, I also work I'm in the Army Reserve as a critical care nurse. And I've been doing that since 2017. And all of my nursing education has been either at VTC or UVM. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, you've gone from an associate's degree, gotten your master's, your FNP as well as doctorate, correct? And you'll
Correct. Yeah.
you
So
also do some service, like not army, but for
yeah, the Army.
you. So you're national all over the place, doing all kinds of things.
I don't know about national, but but
Well,
at
you were
least
last
here
in Miami getting some
New
training.
York State. Yeah.
Um, so did you have a message that you wanted to share with our group?
So what I would say is that in terms of the legislative process and being involved, it's something that even though we kind of touched on it maybe in one or two classes during my undergraduate nursing education, it wasn't something that really became apparent to me in terms of its importance until much later on in my nursing career. You know, I think that once we finish our undergraduate nursing, we get our RN, we're all excited about clinical practice, and a good majority of us go into inpatient care, and then that kind of becomes our life for the next few years. And it's only after we start asking, well, where's this money coming from? Where are these regulations coming from? Why do we have JCO? You know, why are we having these CMS audits? That it really dawns on us the importance of being involved in the legislative process. And, you know, I think Jessilyn hit the nail on the head when she said that a lot of our involvement now is once these bills are in committee, and then there's not a whole lot of opportunity for us to influence change. So definitely starting to get involved and look around, you know, especially at what are other states doing to make their nurses successful, and then how can we incorporate what they're doing on the legislative front into Vermont. So then we have not only a strong nursing workforce, which I think we have, but we have a nursing work environment, or an environment that's conducive to wanting to stay in Vermont and not do, you know, the traveler thing that a lot of nurses do. Because I do agree with a lot of the points that were made in terms of the fact that Vermont in itself is not an affordable state, but I also feel that there are things that we can do to make nursing in Vermont a attractive proposition, given the fact that our cost of living is high here, and a lot of that does rest on what we do in our state legislature and what initiatives we really push hard for. And yeah, doing tax incentives is a challenge, but I think that if we were all united as a Vermont nursing force, then, you know, the legislators would hear us. And it's not that, you know, we weren't told that it's an impossible task. We're just told that it's a challenge. But again, you know, our legislature is here to work for us and on our behalf. So, you know, I definitely think one of the things that ANA-Vermont can continue to champion and maybe even make it a top legislative priority for next year is to look at these tax incentives, which will not only help new nurses, but it will help sustain our nursing workforce that has been here for decades and decades. Sorry, I can't see if anyone's talking because I'm on just audio.
There, I was muted. I was just thanking you. People were listening to you. So everybody could hear you well. Did you want to add anything else? We're approaching within 5 minutes of the time where our Vermont Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray is going to be joining us.
I would just throw out a request to people in the group, if you have ideas, if you have initiatives specifically focused on what we can do at the state legislature level, definitely reach out to us and become our partners in making that change. We have our ideas as a Vermont ANA board, and then we have ideas that members present, but I think that we are never in a position where we don't need more ideas.
And we would love more people to join the Government Affairs Committee, which we should maybe change to Advocacy Committee because it just sounds so much nicer. But absolutely would love more people to be involved. And whether you have a great understanding or no understanding at all, we're really learning and growing this together. And the more voices we have, also the more manpower we have, not one or two people can do all the work we need to do. And this is what Juliette and I talked some about is, if you only have a very limited amount of time or you only have time available during certain months, well, we still would love the help and those extra voices. So anyone that's here and listening to this as nurses, or the nurses that listen to this recorded after the fact, please reach out to us and join with us. Let's all kind of work together and have a louder voice.
Since we have a minute, I might share. We had a wonderful little message that we received when we honored nurses a year after the pandemic began from our Representative Welch. So, never mind. We have Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray waiting in our waiting room right now. So if she's there, I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'll share the little short message from the Governor Scott as well as Representative Welch after she speaks. So. And there is our wonderful next new speaker, Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray. I find that you're an extraordinary woman. When I looked about you, you started out working in communities and around the globe in humanitarian response and human rights, yet you are rooted in rural Vermont. And so you have a wonderful background that gives you insights from different kinds of communities and aspects than many people in your position. So I look forward to having you share with us today. And I would just invite you to share what you'd like to share first, and then maybe a little question and answer period after, if that's something that you're comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, if we record you, do we have permission to
record? Oh, yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, Meredith, it's wonderful to meet you. And I see a number of other folks here: Samantha, Barbara, Helen, Peggy, Grace, Juliette. I think someone's on the phone as well. My name is Molly Gray. I'm very, very pleased to serve as Vermont's 82nd Lieutenant Governor, fourth woman ever in Vermont's history to serve. I'm actually here today in my office. The State House is empty. I'm sorry we can't welcome you in person to the State House, but I hope next year at this time we'll be able to do that and things will be back to normal. I'd love to just, I guess, tell you a little bit about myself, some priorities for the office, but before doing that, just extend my absolute most heartfelt thanks and deep, deep support for all the work of you all and other members over the last year. I was with the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, on Wednesday in Burlington at a health center. And we were reflecting on how our nurses in particular have been on the front lines of this pandemic, not only caring for our families and our communities, but in many ways also serving as family at a time when family members can't get to hospitals or couldn't get to hospitals or long-term care facilities. So I just want to express my deepest thanks, and I look forward to hopefully having more of a conversation discussion over the next 20, 30 minutes or so. But a little bit about me. I grew up in Orange County, Vermont. I don't know if anyone is from Orange County, but I grew up in Orange County and now live in Chittenden County, but work in Washington County, obviously in Montpelier, and really proud to be a graduate of our education system from kindergarten all the way through Vermont Law School. Have lived and worked across the state, but also in humanitarian response with the International Committee of the Red Cross in places like Africa and the Middle East, and decided ultimately to run for lieutenant governor because of our demographic crisis, because of our struggles to keep young people here, to go into nursing and to go into teaching and to go into the trades and all of those jobs that we absolutely need for our communities to be whole. So I look forward to talking a little bit about workforce development today. I'm very supportive of the licensure bill, which I know is in the House and hopefully will be going to the governor soon. It's definitely an area, workforce development is an area where the governor and I are very much on the same page, and we'll be doing a lot and have been doing a lot to help strengthen workforce development opportunities. Workforce development obviously is focus. One thing that the second gentleman and I heard from nurses on Wednesday, and he asked this question, what can we do for you? And I think there's a resounding feeling like one thing that we can absolutely do for nurses and those, and especially the women who have been on the front lines throughout this pandemic, is do everything we can to get childcare, to get paid family and medical leave, to actually have equal pay in our state. And I will be working day in and day out. I will continue to bang the drum, march the march on those issues, because I think they're extremely critical here in Vermont. I'm very supportive of broadband, have been working across the state to help us close the broadband gap. We have a lot of funding, as you probably know, coming through the American Rescue Plan, a historic amount of money, but recognizing that we can't have true equity in public health until we have equity and access to broadband. I think when we talk about equity, we also have to recognize that we need to be a more diverse state, and that starts with ensuring we have nurses who are supported and trained, and there are all the opportunities to expand cultural competency and literacy, cultural literacy, and how we apply and provide access to healthcare. And I think, finally, I've been just reflecting a little bit over the last week because of Earth Week and Earth Day yesterday on science and how, in many ways, our Vermont response to this pandemic has been so successful because of your leadership, because of Commissioner Levine's leadership, because of our collective leadership as a state in saying we trust the science, we're going to take real measures to socially distance, to wear our masks. I just had mine on, but I took it off. And that now is the time to really do the same when it comes to recognizing the impact of climate change in our communities and our health. Everything from the increase that we see in tick-borne illness to these really diverse weather patterns, right, that impact our well-being and much more that you see every single day in doing your work. So with that, I just want to say hello. It's really wonderful to meet you, that my office door is open. I hope this is the first conversation of many to come. And that you have my utmost support and deepest respect, not only today, but as we move forward. I look forward to keeping the door open and doing anything I can to support your work. So thank you.
So now I'm unmuted.
They often say the best things are said when you're muted, so you'll have to start at the beginning.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for all that you're doing as the first woman lieutenant governor. And
well, fourth, but it's been a long time. It's been a few generations. We have a lot of high school and college graduates have never seen a woman in lieutenant governor's office or governor's office. So yeah, happy to blaze some new trail.
That's right, setting a role model. And it's interesting, women have really been hit hard by the COVID epidemic, and harder. And our workforce is a majority of women. Unfortunately, only about 10% are men. We're working on that, but it really has been hard on our nursing population. What do you think that is the biggest barrier to some of the disparities that you see in healthcare going forward? And I know that's a huge topic, but there's so many disparities in healthcare across the board.
Yeah, it's hard to put a finger on just one. And, I actually think that the due diligence that we as elected leaders need to do is actually say, it's not what I think, it's what you think, you who are in the field, on the front lines, day in and day out. And there's so much from this pandemic that we haven't fully captured yet. We know everything's been exposed, right? Broadband is now an essential service. It is the highway to human rights, right? From education to remote work to telehealth to just basic public safety and health information to providing mental health and support services. I mean, I see that as a huge inequity in Vermont, where if you're working in our rural health clinics, you are on the front lines trying to get services to folks who don't have access to the internet. And that's really, really tough. I think Vermont is the leader, and I know Vermont is the leader in having women disproportionately impacted, right? We had 74% of unemployment claims filed in, I think it was November or maybe October, that were filed by women. That's the highest in the country. And if we're going to talk about equity and economic well-being, which is equity and well-being, health, I think we have to address what jobs are women in. And if we're going to have a situation where we have women providing care for our communities and care for our families, how are we caring for women, right? So that's why childcare is so critical, and making sure that's affordable and it's quality and it's accessible. It's not a barrier. Making sure that we have equal pay, making sure that we also have workplaces that are safe, not only in the PP, personal protective equipment that's available. I always get the PPE and then the loans confused, make sure I have the right letters there. But not only just having the safety and health equipment, but like, what is a healthy environment? What is a healthy workplace? I think just the toll of this pandemic, and again, I'm speaking when I'd rather be listening, so I'm going to stop here in a second, but the toll of this pandemic on women who've had to work longer hours, who've had to deal with a larger patient load, who have really been providing, and I'll share this as a sort of personal anecdote. I had an aunt, my dear aunt has unfortunately passed away, but in the last 7 months of her life, we couldn't see her. And every day calling a nurse who was one of several long-term care providers, and she was my aunt's family for the last days and months of her life. And just to imagine that women in particular have been family for members of our communities and our families who have been in facilities or have been in care. And I just don't think we fully understood yet that impact on women, impact on nurses, impact on care providers, and just the moment we now have to reform our system and to provide a lot more support to those most essential workers, to you all. So, I say that as a lieutenant governor that doesn't have a direct role in the legislative process, but these are issues that I care deeply about and I'm talking about every day. And as a woman in this office, we'll be pounding the table. So, but maybe with that, I'd be really happy to listen, I guess, more than anything, and just hear from you. I mean, what do you see as the greatest opportunities as we use the American Rescue Plan dollars and the money that's a little bit discretionary in that bill? And then the American Jobs Plan, which obviously is just a proposal right now from the White House, but there is a lot of focus in that proposal on women's employment and equity in employment, and looking at enforcement of equal pay, enforcement of safe and healthy work environments, which I think are pretty critical, even here in Vermont. So I'll stop there and I'll happy to listen.
I'm going to encourage some other people to speak rather than just me. But one of the things that I have mentioned before is just preceptors, people that are in the community that are the preceptors of student nurses need to have some kind of reimbursement of some kind. So because they're getting worn out and they're doing just volunteer work, essentially, you know, they're assigned students and whatnot. And they're also community people who could be preceptors, and they're getting tired of just doing it. And it winds up being a burden for them, and they're already overwhelmed. So any way that we could support some of the preceptors and the people that are seasoned nurses, not just the new graduates, I think is something to consider, because people are just so exhausted that are in the profession right now. And they're the ones that have been holding the hands of those people. And it's been hard on them, you know, watching people die.
Yeah. And when you say preceptors, I'm just going to, is that sort of like volunteer nurse corps? I just to be clear on, I'm just going to ask, I'm not entirely sure what that
No, it's a good calling out on me. So that's a good thing. So preceptors are like the mentor of the person. Like if you have a nursing student who goes to a floor, she has to be followed by somebody. And a lot of times you have, especially once they're past their associate's degree and they're going on to they're getting their, you know, full RN or BSN or different kinds of degrees, they have to have somebody that covers them in kind of oversees them on the floors, in the hospitals, in health clinics, wherever they are. So those people, it just winds up being a volunteer service for them. And it's usually the same people that are tapped over and over again that are out in the communities and in the hospitals that are asked to basically, you know, we have this, you know, student that, you know, would need some guidance and wants to, you know, follow you, you know, would you do that again? And I know that there's some schools that are having trouble finding preceptors that'll keep on repeating doing that service because they're.
Yeah, that sounds like thank you for explaining. Now I have a new word to add to my vocabulary on workforce development in areas where we need more people. I mean, I was talking to the president of VTC recently, and I know that there's a lot of efforts to build and expand the nursing program there. But just, you know, one thing I'm pretty focused on in terms of workforce development is how do we really kind of change the way that we talk about jobs in the state and try to get young people who are coming out of high school and especially out of this pandemic and, you know, coming out of college as well, but really thinking about like, what does it mean to be part of a thriving 21st century economy and society in Vermont, one that's equitable, one that's diverse, one that's really thinking about the future, be it, you know, electric vehicles and being a technician or engaging with remote learning, which I think is here to stay, or telehealth. And what does it mean to be a care provider in a community where we really, really value those who provide care and work in our healthcare system, and trying to just engage students. And like, you don't have to go get a degree with a whole bunch of student loan debt to be valued. And I think that, and if I can speak really frankly, I think that at some point my generation got directed in a direction that hasn't led to a lot of economic stability. As a 30-something with student loan debt who's like still paying it off in hopes of buying a home. So yeah, I think, you know, nursing is one area where the more we can encourage young people and build up those incentives, the better.
It almost seems like nursing gets a bad rep for being like people think of them more like nursing assistants instead of the things that nurses have to juggle and the leadership roles that they take. They don't understand really what nursing is. So it's almost like we need to do a campaign to change how the perception of nursing is, because they're the decision makers. We're the ones that are at the bedside. And
absolutely. And I feel like until sometimes you are in a hospital or an environment caring for a family. I remember my mom was in the hospital before this pandemic, and I was like, you know, great. The doctor kind of steps in for a moment to give us some thoughts, but it's the nurses who have been there, you know, day in and day out, providing consistent care and a lot of advice and explaining, educating, you know, helping families understand really challenging issues, medical issues at times. So anyhow, yeah, but happy to answer any other questions, or if there's, I know that you'll hear from the governor shortly, but we meet regularly. So there's issues I can bring up with him. Again, on workforce development, we're pretty aligned and we meet regularly. I know you've met with legislative leaders, but it is wonderful to have 3 women in leadership in the State House. And I think that if you haven't seen it yet, I think you will see that representation matters and that we do share an agenda that's very, very focused on supporting women in the state. And men, of course, who are also in nursing, but knowing that a lot of the work has been done by women on the front lines.
Yeah, we have our president of ANA-Vermont is a man right now who's on the call. Maybe he could share with you what it's like being a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because it's probably been a different view for him going into a more female-dominated profession.
Is this Andrew?
Oh, let me make sure he's not muted or something. I don't know. It seems like he.
Okay, maybe he stepped away from
muted. He might be muted. I can only add. It says ask to unmute. I'm asking. I guess I have to ask Andrew to unmute or something.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello?
There.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you? Happy
Good,
Friday.
good.
It's been quite a week, huh?
Every week for me is quite a week.
Sure.
I guess looking forward to the weekend. So I missed the prompt, the question.
Oh, well, I was actually just talking about how it's pretty remarkable to have, for the first time ever, a woman in the Lieutenant Governor's office, and a woman as President Pro Tem, and a woman as Speaker. And, my hope is that we start to put forward and really build an agenda that addresses a lot of the issues facing women in the state, and women have really been on the front lines of this pandemic. But I also want to recognize that we have certain professions, and I think Meredith was mentioning this as well, where we don't see a lot of diversity and diverse representation, which is so important. Having diversity is so important in different professions, be it more women as serving as electricians or more men serving as nurses and healthcare providers in the state. And I think the prompt was sort of, what is it like leading the American Nurses Association Vermont chapter as a man, and sort of what do you do to sort of elevate the voices of your members? Sorry, I think I might be putting on you on the spot too much, Andrew, but
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I would say for me, my identity as a male has been less of an issue working as a nurse than my identity as being Chinese American. I think that in Vermont, there's a general acceptance and tolerance from patients to have care providers that are with different gender identities. I think that for doctors, there's a little bit more of the gender stigma or gender defined roles that patients come to the hospital with. But I haven't really had any personal negative experiences based off of my gender. I think that what I see in our nursing profession is having female voices that are elevated higher than in other professions is extremely valuable, because there's a lot of nuances that female voices bring and female perspectives bring, that, if you have a bunch of guys in a room talking about a patient care issue, where we might get there, but it's not a lot of the psychosocial isn't innately intuitive to us. And I'll say that's been my experience, and that's been the experience of male nurses that my colleagues that I talk to about this. But I'm not going to try to generalize that. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, in terms of diversity in the Vermont nursing workforce, where I've had friction points is really not being white, and having patients question whether I am competent enough to provide nursing care to them, whether I actually know what I'm doing. So it's really, for me, that's really been where I've had struggles. And the challenge is, I mean, I have a doctorate in nursing practice, but if you tell a patient, no, I think I'm pretty confident because I have a master's in nursing and I have a doctorate in nursing, they still look at you like you're speaking to them in a foreign language. So that's really where I've had friction points with patients.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I was mentioning earlier that how do we address the state, just the health, well-being, discrimination in the workplace, and also creating an environment where we have culturally competent healthcare workers, right? And I think that also starts with like making sure that we have environments that support cultural competency and support diversity, right? So that if you're coming into a healthcare facility in the state, that as a worker, you know that you're going to be treated with respect, treated safely, and trying to really further define what that means and what that looks like and what measures we have in place to ensure that. But also knowing that a diverse workforce, a workforce that comes from a lot of different experiences and backgrounds, like that only increases the quality of care that we can provide in the state. And I think that's really, really important as we work to recover stronger from this pandemic, but also just think about like, what does it mean to be a Vermont that's really recruiting, really retaining like qualified, diverse Vermonters with a lot of different experience. And I thank you for sharing that. And I guess I was going to ask a follow-up question. I will just, what do you think we could do to remove barriers to the profession and to recruit? I guess, I hesitate to say male, but like male, just more diverse, like nurses, period.
Yeah, so I think from a workforce recruitment standpoint, one area to look at is the nursing faculty that we're recruiting, and how are we incentivizing, especially not only nurses from within Vermont that have a Vermont perspective, but nursing educators from outside of Vermont that can bring in new ideas, that can bring in new energy.
Yeah.
How are we incentivizing those nurses into the faculty ranks, and making this a place where, yeah, it may not be the most diverse state in the union, but it's also a place where these young, bright nurses, hopefully BIPOC nurses, are able to make a change and have a stance in the nursing faculty. So I would, that would be one idea. UVM does a good job with recruiting BIPOC staff. So that is potentially, what they're doing. That model may be potentially something that is championed on the state level, and within the state college system.
Yeah. That's great. Good. No, I think that's, I'm not sure with any of the existing legislation. I know that there's like a public health equity bill that was introduced in the House, and I think it's now come to the Senate, but I'm not sure where it's going to go this session. But I'm going to take a look at that for sure.
But even like funding on the state level, providing funding for, postdoctoral fellowship or a teaching fellowship that is open to people that are BIPOC or people with various gender orientations.
Yeah.
That would be something that is doable on the state level, or after you establish that the program has efficacy, having the state champion a HRSA grant from the federal government to sponsor these postdoctoral fellowships or education fellowships. So that, just a couple ideas off the hip.
Yeah. That's great. We actually have a draft letter to the White House. So I was mentioning earlier, the second gentleman was here this week and was very focused on BIPOC vaccination clinics and focuses on of the state to build like a multilingual task force to try to expand access to basic COVID information, right? In Swahili and Nepali and Somali, like so many of the languages that we have, particularly in Chittenden County. But I feel like if truly as a nation, we're going to expand refugee resettlement and raise the cap, and Vermont is going to be a place where we have a more welcoming and diverse and equitable environment to host former refugees. It begins with kind of some really, really important investments from the administration and from the federal government right now to do exactly what you've said. And so I might follow up with you, but I'd love to include some of these recommendations in the letter to be like, these are really specific things that we can do in the state to increase equity and access to public health, for example.
Yeah, I'd be happy to help out in any way I can, and Meredith can send you, or do you have staff?
I have a staff of one, and she's amazing,
Okay.
Hazel Brewster.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe it's actually hazel.brewster@vermont.gov, but maybe Meredith, I'll follow up through you, or if you want to send an email, but maybe I could share a draft with you. Yeah, I'd love, or any other feedback that you have would be much appreciated. Yeah, I know that you're hearing from the governor in 3 minutes. Are there any other questions? And again, I really hope this is the first conversation of many. My virtual office door is open, but my actual door will be open as soon as the State House is. And I really look forward to welcoming you all next year, or as soon as the opportunity arises.
I'll jump in real quick and just kind of echo what I've mentioned to all the other elected officials we were lucky enough to speak with today. My name's Jessilyn. I'm Vice President of Vermont ANA, and I chair the Government Affairs Committee. So it's been an awesome year kind of learning and growing, and I look forward to next year. But the one thing I've been talking about is a theme that I've noticed in the last year during this legislative session that I want to continue working on. And not only working with nurses to realize they have more of a voice than they think and how powerful it can be and how we can work together to amplify that voice, but also put it back on, legislators and representatives and you guys and say, hey, how can we be included more at that macro level instead of just waiting till something's in committee and we testify. I spoke earlier in today's meeting and I went through several different bills, and the theme I noticed is nurses aren't included on the committees. They're not included on the advisory boards. They're not included in the decision-making process. And that's where I want to see our voices go more. And that's where I think we can have more of a substantial impact. A great example, Ginny Lyons brought up H210. It's a 27-person board for health equity, and it has no nurse on it. So why not add a 28th person and add a nurse, right? So there's so many different boards that I've looked through, and I compiled a list of at least 12, if not 15, of like, wow, they would benefit for a nurse. There's a bill right now on emergency service providers. Nurses are emergency service providers. So my goal, as this was a learning year. Next year, I'm excited to move forward with the government affairs committee. My goal is to get nurses to speak up more, realize the power that comes with, you know, teamwork, more than one or two nurses, that we do have such a powerful voice, but then to challenge that back at you guys and say, hey, how can we be included more at that macro level and from the beginning, not at the, hey, let's fix this, or hey, let's comment, let's amend this. No, let's get us on the boards. Let's get us on the committees. Let's be part of that change from the absolute get-go. So when I see a 27-member board that doesn't include on health equity, like, whoa, come on, that's right. So so if that's something you can bring back or keep in your mind as to all of these different things that, you know, committees and groups that are being formed, nurses would love to have more of a voice and a seat at the table, not only to represent our workforce, which is so important, but we're the patients' voices too. Yeah. Nobody more than nurses know that angle and can speak and be a fierce, you know, warrior for their patients. And that's what I'd really like to see in the future.
Yeah, thank you. That's incredible. And I guess I'll just say a couple things. One, I would say January of next year would be a great time to meet again, and happy to do a joint meeting. I think in some ways we also have to break down the silos, and I'm happy to say, hey, Jill, Becca, like, let's do this meeting together, and figure out what's going to happen inside the building versus what's going to happen outside the building. My work is more sort of outside, and I actually host I'm calling it Seat at the Table, but a bi-weekly speaker series every other Monday. And I'd love to do one where we will build a big table for you and for any nurses that want to be there to kind of, let's flag issues at the start of the legislative session. I'm really, really happy to do that. And the third piece is that I sit on the Committee on Committees, which is basically a body that appoints different committees, boards, commission representatives. So as you know, I would say have those conversations with the legislature when they're drafting bills and thinking about committee makeup. But anytime there's a discretionary seat, you know, feel free to also send me an email and say, hey, when you assign this committee, you know, here are some nurses or here are some representatives that could have an important perspective to bring. So let's keep in touch on that for sure.
Thank you.
And again, I look forward to meeting you once the building's open. So
thank you.
With that, I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and just my most sincere appreciation. And I feel like it's not even my thanks to give, but I just want to say thanks for all you do. So, okay, take care. Bye. Thanks. Thank you, Andrew.
Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Well, that was nice. I appreciated that perspective. I really feel like, you know, we're being invited to participate. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that same vibe, but I'm really feeling that, you know, we are just being very welcomed by people across the board. And I really have felt that way. You know, like, for example, when talking with Ginny Lyons, you know, it's like when you talk with her, she always is interested in listening and paying attention. So I hope that you are also taking from this that nurses are welcome at the table. So we just have to figure out how to get there at the beginning, at the start, and say, oh, you know, we're available, we're there, and we have to have people that are available to be there. So we need to have like a committee of people, or, you know, some nurses that are out there in the state that are willing to represent nursing and tell their stories and just be a part. I'm going to go ahead and share it is actually a sent message that we have. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to have to share my screen here. So for some reason, I'm going to have to do this so that I can share my screen. Okay.
And thanks for inviting me to speak at your legislative day. While I wish I could be there in person, I'm hopeful that with the tireless work of your colleagues across the state to get Vermonters vaccinated, we'll be able to see each other again sometime. In the meantime,
I'm just going to stop this for a second to try to let it kind of download for a minute. because the wind is blowing hard where I am.
Ask them if it's showing up okay or if it's jumping.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting me. To speak today. While I wish I could be there in person, I'm hopeful that with the tireless work of you, your colleagues, and many across the state to get Vermonters vaccinated, we'll be able to see each other again sometime soon. In the meantime, for the technology that allows me to connect with you remotely. Nurses have always kept our communities and families healthy and safe, and have been the backbone of our healthcare system. But this year, your hard work and dedication has become even more appreciated. You've served on the lines of a battle none of us could have ever imagined. This had
Meredith, if you turn your video off, it might work better.
stepped up, charged head first into this global health crisis. Patients. Even when we knew very little about COVID as a disease, I have a lot of work to do to build up our inventory of much needed PPE. So I want to thank each and every one of you for going above and beyond, putting yourself in harm's way to keep our state safe and protect our neighbors. I know each of you felt the gravity and grief of every life we lost. You understand better than anyone that these aren't just numbers. It's someone's father, brother, sister, mother, friend, or grandparent. This is why my team has been focused like a laser on following the data and science, and made limiting hospitalizations and deaths our top priority from the very beginning. Because of your work, and the help of Vermonters who stepped up to follow the guidance, you saved the lives of thousands of people you don't even know. I also want to acknowledge the toll this pandemic has had on your mental health. And I want to encourage you, if you're struggling, reach out for help. Use the services we have and connect with the Department of Mental Health to learn more, because your well-being matters. I know when you spend a lot of time caring for others, it's difficult to think of yourself. But remember, just like when there's an issue on an airplane, you've got to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. Making time to keep yourself safe and well helps your patients. It's just as important. So please, reach out if you need a helping hand. As we vaccinate more Vermonters, it's truly light at the end of the tunnel that we're all eagerly awaiting for. In the coming months, you'll be critical to our success as we rebuild. But I realize we have a serious workforce shortage, which includes nurses. We need to do all we can to recruit and retain as many as possible. Every year, about 300 RNs and 130 LPNs graduate or receive certification from programs across the state. Not all of them stay. That's why I propose $1.25 million for a nurse retention incentive to keep more right here in Vermont. Because we know just how important it will be for you to have some help as you shoulder the responsibility of caring for Vermonters in the months and years ahead. So today, I hope you get a chance to speak with legislators from around the state and share the issues important to you. So again, thank you so much for your service to Vermonters. I hope to see you again in person sometime very soon.
There we go. I'm going to share one more video of Representative Welch. Where is he? Not showing. See if we can get it to work now.
I want to thank Vermont nurses for the work that they have done for this past year. I want to salute nurses all across this country. You know, we're 1 year into this COVID crisis, and think about how every single day our nurses in Vermont and across the country showed up for work. While all of us were trying to protect ourselves from COVID, they were treating those of us who had COVID, walking into harm's way every single day. And what comfort they gave to those suffering from COVID, to their families. In many cases, those nurses were at the bedside when family couldn't be there. I just can't imagine what it's been like for our wonderful nurses to have to bear the burden of COVID for this 1 year. And 500 of our nurses died in this service. We owe them an immense debt of gratitude. So as one Vermonter, I know I speak for all Vermonters in expressing my gratitude to our nurses who've done extraordinary service this past year. Thank you.
There we are. Here, I suppose I should start my video again. Sorry about that little glitch in the beginning of starting the video last. So
That's a little trick, Meredith. When your internet's not working so good, just turn your camera off and it does better.
I usually do that, but it was kind of like I thought, okay, it was sharing the screen. Why would I matter? But apparently it does. So, well, I want to thank everybody for coming. And is there any sharing that people would like to do just about, you know, thoughts and the end of the day before we wind up ending the day? You know, what are people thinking about the things that they've heard today?
I'm very grateful, as you mentioned, that it sounds like they are very willing and open and excited to hear more from us and meet with us. So that is very exciting to me, and I think gives me a lot of ideas how we can move forward as a committee and as a hopefully larger, stronger voice to really represent Vermont nurses and patients. So I think I have some reaching out to do, and hopefully we'll get some more nurses involved on the committee to have that larger voice. But I was very excited to hear, you know, a very positive, resounding, yes, please kind of chat more with us today from everyone.
I will put my email in the text I'll send to everybody. So if anybody wants to be on the legislative committee or be more involved, to just shoot me an email, and that way you can. So. There.
And I would just say thank you to you, Meredith, and to Andrew for lining this up and supporting nurses throughout the state and doing all this hard work. And like I said, I'm excited to move forward and grow with more nurses. So thank you both.
Well, I hope that Andrew's sutures are doing well. And thank you, Andrew, for showing up in spite of having a lawnmower accident. I have vivid memories of my mother when I was young, actually cutting off the end of her finger, trying to unclot a clod of grass from a lawnmower. So I'm glad it wasn't too bad, I'm hoping, but try not to hurt yourself.
He just showed us the resiliency of nurses, right? Get hurt, go get it fixed, still come back in for your advocacy day and probably keep going back to work.
That's right. Are there any thoughts that people want to share about ideas that we should be sharing with legislators?
I have a nice little quote I'd love to read just to, bring us to conclusion.
Go right ahead. And I'll just say thank you all for coming, and I'll let Jessilyn close the meeting.
All right. Well, this is a quote that I've just always heard over the years. I don't know who actually wrote it, but I've always loved it. It says, "A nurse is not what you do. It is what you are. I am a nurse. It's not what I do. It's what I am."
Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being nurses. And I hope we see you again soon.